Chapter 776. P.S. There will be 2 more updates tomorrow. 3 days later, a spiritual light flew out of the Guardian Palace and went straight to the clear Serenity Lake. When it reached the door, the mirror spirit opened the formation door and led it into the depths of the cave. With Zhang Yan's care, Jingyu had been paying attention to the small devil's cave for the past few days. He wrote a letter every day and didn't dare to slack off. When he saw the spiritual light fly in, he knew that today's letter had arrived. He took it and was shocked. He hurriedly went into the cave and bowed. Master, the disciple on duty at the Eye of the Sea reported that more than 20 disciples who went to the Devil's Cave to cultivate last night suddenly disappeared. When Zhang Yan heard this, his eyes turned cold. There was a devil in the Devil's Cave that attracted people's hearts. If the disciples' heart wasn't firm, it was inevitable that they would be harmed. However, more than 20 people disappeared in one night. This was not an ordinary reason. He said in a low voice, "Let me see." Jingyu hurriedly handed over the letter. After Zhang Yan read it, he threw the letter on the table and said coldly, "Who was responsible for patrolling the Devil's Cave a month ago?" Jingyu hurriedly said, "It was Zhenren Peng's disciple, Shuesong." Zhang Yan sneered. Because opening the Eye of the Sea was not a small matter, he was afraid that the cultivators of the Devil sect had not been completely wiped out, so he sent disciples to check it out. However, Peng Yuzhou swore that with the protection of his sect, nothing would happen, so he blocked the people he sent. This person was one of the top 10 disciples in the past. It would be a joke to say that he couldn't even handle such a small matter. It was most likely that he didn't care about the lives of his disciples. He said, "Pass down my order. Order Zihong to go to the Devil's Cave to protect that group of disciples." He paused for a moment, then said, "Call Kai Wei and Kading here." Jingyu immediately went to pass down the order. Not long after, the Wang sisters entered the cave and paid their respects to him. Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves on the couch and threw down a talisman. He said, "The 2 of you take this talisman and capture Peng Yuzhou's disciple, Shuesong. If anyone tries to stop you, don't hesitate to take them down." Wang Kaiwei took the token with both hands. She thought for a while, then bowed and asked, "May I ask, Master? If Elder Peng steps forward to stop me, what should I do?" Zhang Yan said, "Master will make arrangements. The 2 of you can rest assured." The Wang sisters didn't ask any more questions. After bowing, they retreated. Zhang Yan sat for a moment, then reached into his sleeve and picked up a brush from the table. Shwa shwa shwa. After writing 2 letters, he circulated his transcendence energy and turned into 2 rays of spiritual light that flew out of the mansion. As he watched the letter fly out, his eyes flickered. The Daylight Temple was one of the 3 great temples. Peng Yuzhou was an elder of the palace and had a high status in the sect. He couldn't control him, but it didn't mean that no one could control him. Above the Great Dragon Lake, Peng Yuzhou sat in a flying car. It was pulled by a 2-headed scarlet-winged vermilion bird. It was heading towards the Guardian Palace. There was a slight smile on his face. In the past month, he had visited several clan leaders in the sect, and many of them had agreed to help him build up his influence. Many clans had even sent their disciples over to serve him because they valued his status as an elder of the Daylight Temple. He felt that in the past few hundred years, there had never been such an advantageous situation like the one he was in now. With Du Dagan and Zhang Yan ascending to the position of one of the 10 first seats, it could be imagined that in the next few hundred years, the clans would be firmly suppressed by the master and disciple sect. Now that he stood out, it could be said that he had grasped the key point. Because other than him, there was almost no one else in the clans who could stand out to compete. He sneered. Others might be afraid of Zhang Yan, but he wasn't. When Qi Yuntian became the first seat of the 10 first seats, he was already the eldest disciple of the 3rd generation. His cultivation was high, and he had made great contributions to the sect during the sword competition. Behind him, he had the support of the sect master and the entire master and disciple sect, so it could be said that no one dared to disrespect him. And for Huoxian to ascend to this position, he had the support of the 4 clans. Later on, it was the same for Duda. But in his view, although Zhang Yan had cultivated to the 3rd stage of Yuanying and was the number 1 in the sword competition among the 18 sects, No one in the same generation could compare to him, but compared to Qi Yuntian and Huoxian, he had a big flaw, and that was that he didn't have the support of the master and disciple sect master. For example, with his identity as an elder of the Daylight Temple, there was no way to control him. Now that the Devil's Cave had appeared, if he could make great contributions to the sect and regain the favor of the clans, then he could suppress Zhang Yan. After that, he would be able to compete with Huoxian for the position of the Daylight Temple Master. Thinking up to this point, he couldn't help but be complacent. At this moment, from the corner of his eye, he saw a streak of smoke flying towards him. It was his disciple Shui Gao. He ordered the disciple in front to slow down the flying carriage and waited for Shui Gao to come over. He then asked, "Didn't I tell you to focus on cultivating in the cave for the next few days? Why did you come here?" Shui Song looked a little flustered. He knelt down and said, "Master, disciple is afraid that disciple has committed a crime. I'm here to ask for master's protection." Peng Yuzhou frowned and asked, "What is it?" Shui Gao lowered his head and said, "Yesterday in the Minor Devil's Cave, more than 20 disciples disappeared overnight. Disciple was terrified and afraid that the sect would blame me, so I came to find master." Peng Yuzhou looked at him and said, "Is it because of this?" Shui Gao said anxiously, "Yes." Peng Yuzhou snorted and said unhappily, "I thought something big had happened." He shook his head and said, "Didn't you go and check under the Devil's Cave?" Shui Song said, "Yes, according to what disciples saw at the time, I didn't find anything strange. The Devil's Cave was vast and filled with devils. He was only a core formation cultivator, so how could he dare to go deep? Moreover, Peng Yuzhou had already said that he didn't need to be too serious and was just going to deal with it casually. He didn't think that there really were Devil Sect cultivators hiding there. Peng Yuzhou could ignore the clear nether heavenly lake, but he was a bit afraid. Peng Yuzhou said disapprovingly, "Since that's the case, it has nothing to do with you. It's just the death of a few junior disciples, so why are you so flustered? I'm going to the Guardian Palace to discuss some matters. If someone really comes to blame you, just tell them to come find me." With that, he ordered the disciples in front of him to pull the vermilion bird and continue on their way. When Shui Song heard this, he calmed down and respectfully bowed. He stood on the cloud and watched the flying carriage fly away. Then he stepped on the smoke and returned to his cave. But before he could go far, two girls who looked similar to each other suddenly came over on a smoke, and one of them came up. One of them came up with an object in her hand and said, "Are you Shui Song? I'm here on master's orders to bring you back for questioning." When Shui Song saw the token, he couldn't help but be shocked. He took a few steps back and said calmly, "Why is Taoist Zhang looking for me?" Wang Kating laughed and said, "Sister, there's no need for him to say so much. He knows very well in his heart. He's pretending to be confused." Shui Song said sternly, "I'm under Master Peng, and he's an elder of Daylight Hall. You dare to come and capture me?" Wang Kaiwei said solemnly, "Senior brother Shui, it's true that your master is an elder of Daylight Hall, but as long as you're a disciple of my Qinsong sect, you'll be under my master's control." Shui Song knew that he couldn't fight the two of them together. If he resisted, it would be hard to guarantee that he wouldn't be captured. Thus, he jumped and fled into the clouds. As long as he could get to Peng Yuzhou, the two girls couldn't do anything to him. Wang Kating was on guard when she saw his eyes flickering. Now that she saw him run away, he shrugged. Now that he was fleeing, she immediately took out a silk belt and waved it lightly. It flashed with 7 colors and turned into rays of rainbow light that chased after him. At the same time she said, "Sister, stop him." Wang Kaiwei made a hand seal. She had already escaped into the killer Yin saber. The saber light turned and instantly flashed into the sky. In a breath's time, she was in front of Shui Song. She waved her hand and 2 saber lights, one yin and one yang, chopped down. Shui Song had no choice but to dodge to the side to avoid the saber light. But because of this obstruction, his momentum was also slowed down. He had no choice but to stop and fight. With a sound, a wine cup flew up from the top of his head. It spun once and sprinkled a red glow on his body. He then pushed his hands away and shook his shoulders. A cloud of smoke rose behind him and converged into countless golden flying blades that flew towards the Wang sisters. Wang Keting snorted and hid her hand in her sleeve. With a flick of her finger, a jade bead flew out. In front of her, Wang Kaiwei and her mind were connected. They raised their hands and pressed down at the same time. Suddenly, a delicate fragrance filled the air. Wisps of green smoke scattered down and all the golden flying blades disappeared one by one. Shui Song saw that the situation wasn't good and was about to use another method. At this moment, the jade bead had already arrived. It suddenly flew towards the wine cup. There was a loud sound and the red glow on his body was broken. His chest felt stuffy and his body felt weak. He was about to fall from the clouds. He hurriedly steadied himself. However, this delay allowed the ribbon in Wang Keting's hand to fly over. In the blink of an eye, he was trapped and couldn't move anymore. Shui Song struggled but he couldn't escape. He couldn't help but panic, but he didn't admit defeat. He shouted, "Fine, go ahead and capture me. My master is an elder of the Daylight Temple. Let's see how you deal with this later." The Wang sisters didn't pay any attention to him. They stuck a few more talismans on his body. Only then did they rise up into the air and fly north. At the same time, Peng Yuzhou arrived at the Shoming Palace. Qin Nan came out to greet him. They sat down in the hall and exchanged a few words. Then he asked, "Junior sister Qin, did immortal Peng summon me for something?" He wanted to come out and fight. It wasn't that he didn't want immortal Peng's support. After all, he was a member of the Peng family. It was just that he didn't get any response from immortal Peng. Since Qin Nan had always treated him coldly, he suddenly thought that there might be a response from immortal Peng. He was slightly excited and immediately put down what he was doing and rushed over. Qin Nan said, "It wasn't my master who asked you to come. It was someone else." Peng Yuzhou was surprised and asked, "Who?" At this moment he heard footsteps. He turned around and saw Zhang Yan slowly walking out from the back of the hall. When he came near, he cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Elder Peng." Peng Yuzhou's brows raised as he glanced at Zhang Yan, then glanced at Qin Nan, and he instantly came to an understanding. He grunted coldly and said, "I was wondering who it was. So it's Taoist Zhang. May I know why you called me here?" Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "Yesterday, in the minor demon cave, more than 20 disciples died for no reason. Does Elder Peng know about it?" Peng Yuzhou became a little impatient when he heard it was about this again. He said, "I've heard about it." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "I've said before that the cleanup of the minor demon cave involves the safety of our Qinsong disciples. If anything goes wrong, I will punish them. Since Elder Peng knows about it, don't blame me for not respecting our friendship." Peng Yuzhou became vigilant and said, "What are you going to do?" Zhang Yan said indifferently, "I've already ordered people to arrest Shui Song. When the time comes, he will be punished according to his crime." Peng Yuzhou suddenly stood up and anger appeared on his face. He then took a deep breath and suppressed it. He said, "Immortal Zhang, as the 10 great disciples' first seat, how can you lower your status and stand up for a few junior disciples?" Chapter 777. When Zhang Yan heard that Peng Yuzhou didn't care about his disciple's life, he frowned. Just as he was about to speak, Wang Caiwei's voice came from outside the door. She said, "Master, I've brought Shui Song here. May I know what to do with him?" Just as she finished speaking, Shui Song's voice was heard. He cried, "Master, master, save me." Zhang Yan snorted coldly. He waved his sleeves and immediately leaped out of the palace. Peng Yuzhou was anxious. He shouted and immediately activated the Heaven and Earth Lock technique. He wanted to freeze him for a moment so that he could rush over first. However, just as he used the technique, his body tightened as if a huge rock was pressing down on him. He knew that Zhang Yan had also used the same technique. He snorted and took out a technique. With a flip of his hand, he dispelled it. When he was about to move again, there was another surge of spiritual vigor around him. His feet were unsteady. It was as if he would be turned away if he relaxed. He had no choice but to use his mana to resist it. However, he slowed down by half a beat. His face couldn't help but change. He said in a low voice, 5 elements escape technique. Chapter 778. As one of the 10 first seats, nominally, the other 9 people had to listen to his orders. However, there was a problem here. These people were all disciples of Taoist heavenly abode. He might be able to ask them for help, but if he sent an order, it would definitely be useless. And looking at the sect, anyone with Yuanian cultivation, many of them were elders of the sect, and he could not order them around. As a result, there was not much power he could use. Normally, he would only be able to mobilize the disciples of his own sect, such as Lu Yenyi and Wei Zihong. So in the eyes of outsiders, as long as the 2 of them were still in the mansion, it meant that he wouldn't be able to make any big moves. This situation was not only clear to the people in the sect, but also to the cultivators of the devil doctrine. And Han Wanka and his senior brother showed their usefulness at this time. These 2 had been expelled from the sect for hundreds of years, and no one knew whether they were still in the world. After returning with Shen Baishuang, they had been cultivating in seclusion, and they could be regarded as a hidden chess piece in his hands. But if he only relied on these 2, he could only win for a while, not a long-term plan. If it was Qi Yuntian, Huoxian, and the others, it would not be a big deal, because they had the support of their own masters and sections. They only needed to issue a decree or speak to their sects, and they could ask the Yuanian cultivators to help them. But Zhang Yan did not have Master Dong Tian as his master, so he did not have such convenience. At present, the battle between the 2 sides did not involve the 10 great Xianying sects, so he could not see anything. But in a few decades, once the Devil's Cave appeared, there would be a fierce battle between the Xianying demons. The strength he had now was far from enough. Therefore, he pondered deeply and decided to find a way to reverse the situation. He could still sit in the position of the 10 chiefs for at least 100 years, so he needed to improve the cultivation of his own disciples as much as possible. This way, they could help him, and also give them the power to fight against the 3 great tribulations. In this way, the benefits of becoming the chief could be seen. The sect had all kinds of cultivation items below the core transformation cultivator, such as cave abodes, spirit shells, dharma artifacts, and pills. Most of the authority was in his hands, so he could first think of ways to strengthen the clear nether heavenly lake lineage. This was not because he was doing this for personal gain, but because it was a tacit rule in the sect. The number of people in the profound Water True Palace had increased by several times. Fan Chongqing was the person who took care of worldly affairs for him. After Huoxian's succession, it was the younger generation of the Chun clan who benefited the most. It was during the less than 10 years of Duda's reign. The fiery Roaring Palace and the Du clan had also benefited greatly. Under the bright nether heavenly lake, there was no need to mention Tian Kuan. The Wang sisters, Yuan Yanhui, and Wang Ziyuan were all at the 3rd level of the core transformation realm. In the next few decades, if 1 or 2 of them could enter the nascent soul realm, then when the Devil's Cave appeared, they would be able to help him. Other than that, he had an advantage that no one else could compare to, which was that he had a position in the Dongsheng continent. At the crucial moment, not only could he call a few people from the Deep Abyss sect over, he could also promise great benefits to lure cultivators from the 4 sects in the continent to come and help. However, before that, he had to ensure the stability of his own sect and could not let the Devil sect spy on him. Otherwise, he would lose a move first. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "Jing Yu, go and call Su Jing over." Jing Yu responded outside the cave and hurried away. Not long after, a Taoist with a lion's nose and wide mouth walked in and bowed. Su Jing greets spiritual master. He had been in Bright Nether Palace for more than 100 years now, and he had been painstakingly studying formations. Under his supervision, he had used the small pot mirror as a formation artifact to rearrange the formations in Bright Nether Palace. The defensive strength of the formations was many times greater than before. Although he had not gone out to fight after the devil calamity had begun, if one were to weigh the contributions he had made, it was truly not small. Zhang Yan looked at him and said with a smile, "Although formations are something you are good at, cultivation is the foundation. You can't let go of it." Su Jing immediately agreed. Zhang Yan pointed at a porcelain bottle on the table and said, "This is a pill made by my master. It can increase cultivation. Take it and use it." When Su Jing heard that the pill was personally made by Zhou Chongju, he did not dare to take it. He hurriedly said, "Spiritual Master Wei has taught me many techniques of the Yaoying clan. I am already satisfied and do not dare to ask for more rewards from Manor Head." Zhang Yan said amiably, "There's no need to decline. With my current cultivation, I no longer need such pills. I heard that you've also accepted a few disciples, and they're all studying formations with you. They usually neglect their cultivation. Even if you don't need it, you can give it to them." Su Jing hesitated for a while and went forward to take it. He bowed and said, "Thank you, Manor Head." Zhang Yan talked with him for a while more before getting to the main topic. "I asked you to come here for one thing. Although there are patrolling disciples outside the Qinsong Mountain Gate, it is still difficult to guard against the spying of the Devil's Doctrine. Therefore, I intend to set up 100 altars within 1,000 miles. I will leave it to you to set up. If you need anything, you can go to Jing Changtuo and he will arrange it for you." Su Jing accepted the order and said, "I will do my best and not let down the Manor Head's kindness." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and waved his hand to order him to leave. He thought about it again and felt that at least there were no oversights. He then went to the bed to meditate and adjust his qi circulation, waiting for the wedding banquet tomorrow. When it was about midnight, the mirror in the small pot flashed and the mirror spirit suddenly came out. It reported in a low voice, "Master, there are 2 people outside the door. The leader is a child. He said that he is here to visit under the order of the sect master." Zhang Yan opened his eyes and thought for a while. However, he could not think of anything, so he said, "Invite him in." Not long after, 2 people walked into the cave. One was the boy on duty in the floating heavenly palace, and the other surprised him. It was Peng Yuzhou, who had been captured by Qi Yuntian. However, his face was dark, and his expression did not look good. The Taoist child came up and bowed. He held an item and said, "Zhenren Zhang, this is the letter from the sect master. Please take a look." Zhang Yan took a look and raised his eyebrows. The Taoist child said, "The sect master has decreed that Peng Yuzhou will be imprisoned in Zhaoyu sect for 60 years to atone for his sins." At this point, he paused for a moment before continuing, "Of course, the sect leader has said that if the enlightened master is unwilling, we won't force him. I will lock him up and imprison him in the upper extreme hall. After the enlightened master passes away, he will be released." Zhang Yan saw that there was a contract behind the letter. It was made by Peng Yuzhou and it stated that he was a sinner. If he did not obey the order, he could be punished by Zhang Yan. He smiled and said, "I understand the sect master's intention. Elder Peng can stay." The Taoist child smiled and said, "Then I will go and report." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Jing Yu, send the guest off for me." The Taoist child bowed and left. Zhang Yan turned around and saw Peng Yuzhou standing there motionlessly. He waved his sleeve and removed the seal on his body. He said, "Elder Peng, please sit down and talk." Once the seal was removed, Peng Yuzhou could finally move. He snorted and sat down at the side. He said indifferently, "Zhenren Zhang, what do you want me to do?" Although he was extremely unwilling to listen to orders from Zhang Yan, he had no other choice. He was already close to 600 years old. If he was punished to be locked up for hundreds of years, it would be the same as cutting off his path to Tao. The aristocratic families would definitely not look at him again. Compared to that, he only lost some face. Years ago, he did not fight with the sword in order to save his life. He had already lost face once. Now that he was being humiliated again, it was nothing. Moreover, the sect master had promised him that if he performed meritorious deeds, the sect would also reward him. At least there was some hope. Zhang Yan did not care about his attitude. With the spell deed in hand, he was not afraid of any trouble. In his heart, he praised the sect leader's brilliant move. After this person became his disciple, even if he made great contributions during the calamity, the aristocratic families would not trust him anymore. Since he was in his hands, he had to make the best use of him. So he said, Right now, there is a matter that only Elder Peng can do. So he told him about the plan that he had been plotting for the past few days. Originally, he planned to order Han Wangke and his apprentice brother to attack from the front and then have Zhang Boyan support from the side. This way, they would be able to heavily injure the demon sect cultivators surrounding Linqing Temple. But if Peng Yuzhou, a cultivator of the third grade of Yuanying, appeared, it would be different. Once the heaven and earth lock technique was used, there was a high possibility that they would be able to catch all of them. When Peng Yuzhou heard this, he frowned and said, "Junior brother Zhang, doing this can easily lead to unexpected consequences. Have you thought it through?" He did not care about taking care of a few demon sect cultivators. Right now, most of the battles were between core transformation cultivators. Although there were Yuanying cultivators on both sides, there were not many who fought to the death. But once the sect sent out a great cultivator of the third grade, the demon sect would not be willing to be outdone. It was very likely that it would lead to a vicious counterattack. At that time, his opponent could very well be a hero of the demon sect with a similar level of cultivation as him. This made him slightly worried. He knew a few cultivators of the third grade of the demon sect, such as Yuan Hongyang of the Netherworld Spring sect, Bailey Qingyin of the Blood Soul sect, and Chao Yu of the Jioling sect. None of them were ordinary people. He wanted to perform meritorious deeds and was not willing to lose his life for it. Zhang Yan smiled indifferently and said, "If they dare to come out, that would be for the best. Let's see if they have the guts." The devil calamity had only passed for about 200 years. The four great devil's caves had not appeared yet, and the demon sect's power had not accumulated to its peak. If they dared to show their claws now, he did not mind cutting them off one by one. The 9 subduing devil slip in his bag had not been used for a long time. When Peng Yuzhou heard the killing intent in his words, he was shocked. He thought again and guessed his intention. He thought to himself, Zhang Yan has only been one of the 10 first seats for about 100 years. He clearly wants to force the demon sect to act in advance so that he can earn meritorious deeds. If he really succeeds when he passes away in the future, the sect will help him enter the cave no matter what. But I will inevitably become his stepping stone. When Zhang Yan saw his ugly expression, how could he not see through his thoughts? He smiled and said, "Elder Peng, don't worry. You and I are from the same sect, and I will not send you to your death on purpose. If we meet a powerful enemy, I will naturally deal with them. There is no need for you to show yourself." Peng Yuzhou did not believe him, but he was bound by the oath and had no choice but to listen to his orders. He stood up and said, "Since junior brother Zhang has arranged it so, then let it be so. But I will naturally report this matter to the sect leader." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "That is up to you." Then, there was a hint of coldness in his voice. But Elder Peng must remember one thing. Do not leak any information about this matter. Otherwise, don't blame I for not giving face to fellow sect members. Chapter 779. In front of Jade Plume Pavilion's gates, Yen Xia's hair was covered in pearls and jade, and she wore a robe of phoenix feathers. She sat diagonally on the back of a female swallow, a large red swallow with a wingspan of 30 meters. Scarlet tassels hung down from its body, making it look like a cloud of fire. A large scarlet canopy hung from her phoenix coronet, its surface embroidered with twining branches and intertwining flowers. It was tied to 100 red ropes and black silk knots that hung down from the canopy. Below them hung 100 fate bead. When the wind blew past, it would ring out crisp sounds from time to time, and it would also draw out streams of light. Jade Plume Pavilion had brought out all of its resources for the sake of showing off the sect's foundation. There were more than 200 maids standing in front of the gate, all of them floating in the air. Beneath them were 100 flower rings that were several kilometers long. A dignified and well-endowed woman stood at the very front of the maids, holding a golden branch and silver dew vase in her hand. Behind her was a pair of twin sisters, each of them holding a skirt-covering bowl with a clear stream. The older sister on her left held a sun-bearing myriad seed lotus, while the younger sister held a moon-embracing harmony flower. Behind the two of them was a pair of servant girls with identical appearances, each holding a large round fan. Further behind them was a pair of boys, holding a Luan and Phoenix cup. The rest of the servant girls all carried green baskets, sprinkling beads and flower petals. Fragrant clouds rose, and auspicious light overflowed in all directions. However, Yan Xiaoyang, who was standing next to Yan Xie, had an unwilling expression on his face. He said, "Sister, are you really going to become Dao companions with that Han Zwiching? I heard he's half human, half demon, and not of our race. He's not a good match for you. As long as you say the word, your little brother will immediately take you back and ignore them." Yan Xie glared at him and rebuked, "Little brother, what nonsense are you spouting? Sister, let me tell you, when the people from Clear Nether Manor arrive, don't say such things again, or else I'll have to ask you to leave." Yan Xiaoyang shut his mouth resentfully. At this moment, the beautiful madam walked over with a happy expression. She said, "First Lady, the young master has arrived. The young master has arrived." Yan Xie looked over and saw a golden flood dragon soaring through the clouds up ahead. A handsome young man stood on the dragon's head, dressed in a black robe. She wore a pleated skirt that covered her knees and a pair of high-heeled shoes. Behind her were more than 10 strong men dressed in red. Yan Xiaoyang saw that only a few people had come, completely unable to compare to his side. He couldn't help but curl his lips and say, "Bright Nether Heavenly Lake is only as a..." Not to mention him. Even the few elders of Jade Feather Pavilion frowned as they watched. The Clear Nether Heavenly Lake was also a blessed land, and Zhang Yan was the first seat of the 10 great disciples. If his disciples were to marry, it would not be so shabby. Could it be that he looked down on this disciple of his? Thinking of this, they looked at Han Zwiching with a strange gaze. Yan Xie was faintly disappointed. Although she didn't attach much importance to these superficial things, her husband's actions inevitably made it seem like they were looking down on her. At this moment, there was a rumble in the air, like a thunderclap, and the clouds parted. Out came a flying palace with 4 great pavilions at each of its 4 corners. It was 500 zhang wide and took up almost half the sky from below. Clouds curled around it, and one could even hear the dance of cranes and the cry of phoenixes. An elder of Jade Feather Pavilion couldn't help but cry out in surprise, "The lofty cloud tower?" The lofty cloud tower was forged from the earth fire heavenly furnace. Only the 10 great disciples of Qinsong School could ride it. It was rumored that it could even block the attacks of Heaven Grotto Heaven cultivators. They didn't expect that Zhang Yan would actually take it out and lend it to this disciple. This time, they couldn't help but re-evaluate Han Zwiching's status in Bright Nether sect. Yan Xiaoyang muttered a few times, "What's so rare about it? It's all thanks to Master's kindness. It's not like it's our own." Han Zwiching rode the golden flood dragon up. When he arrived in front of Yan Xie, he looked at his bride, stretched out his hand, and said warmly, "Wife, Master was afraid that the journey would not be peaceful, so he borrowed the lofty cloud tower to come down. Why don't you accompany your husband up the lofty cloud tower?" When Yan Xie heard this form of address, her charming face blushed slightly. She lowered her head, gave a low grunt of agreement, and put her soft hand on his hand. Han Zwiching tightly gripped it, took 2 steps forward, and then stopped. Yan Xie looked at him in confusion. He laughed and said, "Master bestowed me 2 flying star pivot palaces before I left. After some thought, we are husband and wife, so one is enough. There's no harm in leaving the other one for little brother." Yan Xie's beautiful eyes lit up, and she said happily, "Husband is truly considerate." Yan Xiaoyang snorted but didn't want to accept this invitation. However, that beautiful woman pushed him from behind, and he could only say stiffly, "Thank you, fellow Taoist Han." Han Zwiching laughed, "No need to be polite, little brother. In the future, we will all be one family." Yan Xiaoyang cursed inwardly, "Who's one family with you?" Guests had gathered in the Bright Nether Heavenly Lake at this moment, and those who were on good terms with the various clans had all come with congratulatory gifts. However, Han Zwiching was only Zhang Yan's disciple, after all, so apart from a few elders of small sects, most of the people who came were juniors. Among them, there was a green-robed cultivator whose eyes flickered wildly. After walking in a circle, he found a secluded place, lit a short incense, and then silently prayed. When the incense burned out, he inhaled the white ash into his stomach, leaving not a single trace behind. Then he calmly returned to the main hall. Zhang Yan sat in front of the small mirror, watching every single movement of this person just now. He had the headseat seal, so he recognized this person's identity after a slight examination. It seemed like he had already seen 3 of these demonic sect spies just now, and all of them came from the master and disciple sections. He hadn't seen a single disciple of an aristocratic family. However, he wasn't surprised by this. The origins of disciples under the master and disciple sects were complicated. Some were born in the 9 cities, and some were recruited from outside the mountains. Aristocratic families lived together, and most of them were of the same bloodline. It was very difficult for outsiders to sneak in. Mirror Spirit said, "Master, do you want me to arrest them?" Zhang Yan smiled, "No need. These 3 people are still useful. Don't disturb them." Outside the clear nether heavenly lake, 2 disciples of the demonic sect were also watching from afar. Daoren stroked his beard and said, "Just now, our fellow disciples in Qinsong School sent a letter. Lu Yinyi and Wei Zihong are both here. It seems that you and I are worrying too much. It shouldn't be a big deal." The black-robed Taoist was very suspicious. He always felt that something was wrong. He said in a deep voice, "Brother, you don't have to make a conclusion first. As long as the wedding banquet hasn't been cancelled, we can't be idle. Also, we need to pay attention to the top 10 disciples. But I don't have enough people to take care of them. Brother, do you have any ideas?" Daoren glanced at him but didn't say anything. The black-robed Taoist said earnestly, "Brother, don't be careless. If Zhang Yan purposely set up a banquet to attract our attention here and make some other arrangements, it will be a big crime if we lose our disciples because of this." Daoren laughed at his suspicion. But when he thought about the torture in the sect, he was also terrified. He thought about it and finally said, "Brother, you are making things difficult for me. But we really can't be careless. I will think of a way." At the same time, Peng Yuzhou had already passed through the Sea's Eye Devil's cave under the Shoming Palace and reached the surface. He looked around and saw 2 figures waiting there. He said coldly, "Are you 2 junior brother Zhang's disciples?" One of them said, "Junior nephew Peng, you are late." Peng Yuzhou heard this title. He was first angry, then confused. Then he looked over as if he thought of something. When he saw the other person's appearance, he said in disbelief, "Elder Han." At this moment, another person walked out and sighed. "In terms of cultivation, junior nephew Peng couldn't compare to us. Martial nephew Peng, you still can't compare to us, but who would have thought that you would be 1 step ahead of us?" Peng Yuzhou took a step back and looked over. He said in shock, "Elder Kai? Why you here? Didn't you 2 get chased out of the sect?" Han Wanka said, "Thanks to Junior Uncle Shen's help, we can return to the sect. This time, we are also under Junior Uncle Shen's orders. We will help Junior Brother Zhang to deal with the demon tribulation." He looked at Peng Yuzhou with a complicated expression. He heard that this junior nephew was afraid of that senior uncle and didn't dare to go to the 16 sects spell conference to fight. Later on, the Qin tribe forced him to give up his position. But even so, he cultivated in the daylight hall of the floating celestial palace and improved much faster than the 2 of them. Why would they waste their time outside? They would probably be able to cultivate to the middle of the 3rd stage. Because of the delay, their lifespan was almost up and they had no hope of entering the grotto heaven. However, they could return to the sect, and they could still take in disciples and reincarnate in the future. He shook his head and said, "The matter at hand is urgent, so let's not talk too much. Junior nephew Peng, your cultivation is the highest here. Why don't you take charge of this matter?" Peng Yuzhou hurriedly waved his hand and said, "To be frank, I'm just a sinner. With the 2 uncle masters here, how would I dare to take charge?" Just now, Han Wanka was just being polite. He nodded and said, "If that's the case, then there's no need to delay. We will depart now." Peng Yuzhou naturally agreed. The 3 of them used their escape techniques and flew towards the west. To prevent the cultivators of the demon sect from detecting them, They didn't enter the extreme heaven. Instead, they flew on the surface. After 2 days and 2 nights, Green Bull Mountain was already in sight. However, the turbid air in front of them shot up into the sky. There were flashes of spiritual light and tremors. It seemed like there were quite a number of people attacking the mountain guarding formation. Han Wonka didn't rush forward. Instead, he stopped and looked up for a moment. He asked, "Junior brother Peng, how far can your forbidden locking technique go?" Peng Yujo replied, "Normally, it's 6 to 7 miles. If I use my full strength, it can barely reach 10 miles. However, it can only last for 2 hours at most." Han Wonka couldn't help but lower his head and think. Just now, he saw that there were 4 rays of light in front of Green Bull Mountain. However, they weren't gathered in one place. Instead, they were separated by a few miles. It was obvious that they were guarding against the heaven and earth forbidden locking technique. That was why they purposely split up to avoid being caught in one fell swoop. According to the letter, there were at least 5 nascent soul elders on the other side, and one of them was nowhere to be seen at the moment. Either they had left a long time ago, or they were hiding to the side in case someone suddenly launched a surprise attack. He speculated that it was most likely the latter. From this, it could be seen that the cultivators of the demon sect were cunning and ruthless. They weren't easy to deal with. He couldn't help but feel that it was troublesome. He wasn't afraid of them, but he was afraid that if he rushed forward, he would scare them away. If that happened, they could at most leave 1 or 2 people behind. Peng Yujo thought for a moment. His eyes flickered. Martial Nephew has a plan that can break out of the current situation. Han Wonka nodded and looked at him expectantly. "Martial Nephew, please speak." Peng Yujo said, "Elder Han, you can send a letter to Linqing Monastery to pretend that the formation is broken and let these 4 people in. Then, you can close the formation door. We can first deal with the devil sect cultivators outside, including the person hiding in the dark. Then we can go back and kill the 4 people." Han Wonka closed his eyes. This plan wasn't bad, but if the 4 cultivators of the demon sect killed their way into Linqing Monastery, even if the 2 Yuanying elders could stop them, they would suffer heavy losses. This was actually using the lives of the disciples of Linqing Monastery to exchange for a chance to kill the cultivators of the demon sect. Moreover, under such a dangerous situation, they had no other choice. If they succeeded, they would have a chance to kill all the people of the demon sect here. However, this would be using their fellow cultivators as bait. Should they do it or not? Chapter 780. Seeing that Han Wonka was silent and hesitant to come to a decision, Kai Rongju thought for a moment and then said, "Little brother thinks that although apprentice nephew Peng's method can exterminate all the demonic cultivators, if word of it spreads out, it will damage the reputation of my Azure Mountain. Why don't apprentice brother write down the reason in the letter and let the fellow Taoists of Linqing Monastery decide for themselves? If they are unwilling, then we can choose another method." Han Wonka shook his head and said in a low voice, "Junior brother, you don't know, but there are 3 retainers of spiritual master Zhang in Linqing Monastery. 2 of them are disciples of Qinsong. I have to be careful." Kai Rongju immediately stopped talking. If Han Wonka knew about this, it meant that Zhang Yan took care of these people before he came out. It was obvious that these people were very important to him, so he couldn't ignore their lives. At this time, his thoughts changed again and he suddenly remembered something. He turned his head and said, "Senior brother, it seems that the sect sent 2 disciples last time, but because the demonic cultivators were too strong, they were stopped outside. They have been here for a long time, maybe they know something about the other side. Why don't we find them and ask them?" Han Wonka didn't care about the 2 core formation cultivators at first, but now that he was reminded, he felt that it was reasonable. They didn't know the real situation of the other side, but these 2 had already been here for a long time, maybe they could get some information out of them, so he said, "Junior brother is right, I will send a letter to summon them here." After reaching an agreement, the 3 of them landed on their respective clouds and hid in a forest. Then they sent out a talisman. After more than an hour, 2 streaks of smoke flew over. However, they didn't stop when they arrived at the rendezvous point. Instead, they flew past where the 3 of them were. Han Wonka praised. These two are very cautious. Kai Rongju also nodded in agreement. The two disciples didn't miss the meeting place. They did it on purpose to prevent any demonic cultivators from secretly following them. This way, even if they couldn't see through it, Han Wonka and the others would be able to. Peng Yuzhou, however, was disdainful, thinking, they think they're smart. He had the heaven and earth seal technique, so as long as an enemy came within 6 to 7 miles of him, he would be able to sense it. He would definitely be able to sense it and think that it was unnecessary. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the two disciples returned. With the flying letter leading the way, they found the three people. The leading disciple lowered his body and bowed respectfully. Hu Jianyu and Zheng Guangqing, disciples of Floating Rock Island, greet the three perfected masters. The king of Han comforted the two of them and asked about the situation. Hu Jianyu said, the demonic cultivators are numerous, shitty, and I can't get too close, but with the help of magic treasures. After carefully observing this place for many days, I saw that there are 5 people riding the strong wind, and there are more than 30 people using the fiendish smoke. Han Wonka slowly nodded. The number of Yuanian cultivators here was roughly the same as what was stated in the letter, so there should be 5 of them. As for whether there would be a few more, there was no need to think too much about it. If there were 6 of them, they could join forces and create a demonic cloud within a radius of 50 kilometers. Even if someone with a cultivation base higher than theirs came, they would not be able to see through them. Han Wonka said again, now that I've observed, there are only 4 of them. Do you know where the other one usually hides? The key now was the person hiding in the dark. If they could find him and deal with him, then they might be able to catch the 4 off guard. Hu Jinyu said awkwardly, those people's whereabouts are erratic, and the 2 of us are hindered by our cultivation. We can't see too clearly. Han Wonka asked a few more questions, but seeing that he couldn't get any more information, he ordered the 2 of them to leave. Peng Yuzhou was a bit impatient and said, Shu, why think so much? Our Qinsong is here to help. This is an act of kindness, and I don't think Linqing Monastery will dare to disrespect us. You can just state clearly in the letter and order them to take care of our Qinsong disciples. Han Wonka thought for a long time, but couldn't think of any good ideas, so he sighed and said, then let's give it a try. He immediately wrote a letter, but after a while, the letter came back. He pulled himself together and opened it. His eyes were filled with surprise, and he handed it to Kai Rongju and said, Shitty, take a look. Kai Rongju's eyes swept over it, and he also revealed a surprised expression. He said in surprise, I didn't expect Linqing Monastery to have such a backup plan. We can make a big deal out of this. The letter said that there was a temple under Linqing Monastery that was connected to the river outside the mountain. It also pointed out the specific location and the method to break the restriction, and invited the 3 of them to enter the monastery to discuss countermeasures. Han Wonka also didn't think that there would be a light at the end of the tunnel. If they could enter Green Ox Mountain, even if they didn't do anything, they could still wait for the demon sect cultivators to walk into the trap. So he said, let's enter Linqing Monastery first, then we'll discuss. The 3 of them called Hu Jinyu and Hu Jianyu, and searched according to the letter. They easily found the tributary of the river, and then they went underwater. The cultivation method that the 3 of them cultivated was the Xian Zhe True Wonder technique, so they didn't encounter any hindrance as they moved through the water. In just 2 hours, they found the location of the forbidden door at the bottom of a cliff. They removed the talisman and sure enough, there was a passageway in a ravine. Not long after, they saw a brilliant pearl leading the way ahead, and there were waves of ripples of light waves. They knew that they weren't far from the exit, so they moved upwards in unison. Song Hong was now the monastery master of Linqing Monastery. After knowing the identity of the 3 of them from the letter, he didn't dare to be slow, and had already led a few disciples to welcome them. However, the 2 elders of the monastery had to guard the formation door, so they couldn't leave. At this moment, the lake water under their feet swirled, and they knew that the people had arrived. The spiritual vigor around them surged, and 3 whirlpools suddenly appeared on the surface of the water. Then the jade spring gushed out, and the water foam splashed everywhere. 3 Taoists stepped on the waves, and their sleeves fluttered in the wind. He quickly went forward and greeted, Linqing Monastery's Song Hong welcomes the emissaries. Han Wangke returned the greeting, Monastery Master Song is too courteous. After the greeting, Song Hong invited the 3 of them to the main hall. The moment they sat down, he apologized, the devil sect has been attacking day and night, and most of the disciples and elders are guarding the formation door. It's inevitable that I didn't serve you well, please forgive me. Han Wangke understood, and the current situation wasn't suitable for too many pleasantries, so he asked directly, how many more days can the formation of your monastery hold? Song Hong sighed and said bitterly, if the 3 of you don't come, I'm afraid it can only last until tonight. Before the 3 of them arrived, Linqing Monastery's situation could be said to be as precarious as a pile of eggs. Even Wang Ziyuan, Yuan Yanhui, Shendong, and other disciples of the Yudzong sect had to personally guard the array, unable to leave for even a moment. If not for that, he wouldn't have revealed the secret place of Linqing Monastery to outsiders. Han Wangke stroked his beard, Monastery Master Song, don't worry. Since we are here, we don't have to fear them. However, if we want to eliminate all the enemies, we still need Monastery Master's cooperation. Song Hong stood up and solemnly bowed. He said, Linqing Monastery is extremely grateful that the High Sect is able to come to our aid in such a critical moment. If you have any instructions, I will definitely do it. Han Wangke used telepathy to convey his plan. In the end, he said, what do you think, Monastery Master Song? His plan was similar to Peng Yuzhou's, but now that they were in the monastery, they wouldn't harm any of the disciples. Song Hong didn't hesitate and said, this is a good plan, I will go and arrange it now. He excused himself and left hurriedly. Han Wangke said, Junior brother Kai, your movement technique is above mine, I will leave the person outside to you. Peng Shizhi and I are enough to handle this. Kai Rong stood up and said calmly, Senior brother, don't worry, I won't let that person escape. He bowed and went out the way he came. Song Hong returned very quickly. Now that the arrangements were in place, the 4 of them discussed for a while and felt that there were no more mistakes, so they sat down to meditate and waited for the time to come. 4 hours passed in the blink of an eye, the sky had darkened, and suddenly there was a loud sound of thunder on the Linqing Monastery's mountain gate formation, as if a mountain had collapsed, obviously it had been broken. The 4 flying lights in the sky saw this, and were overjoyed. They called out to each other, and without hesitation, entered the mountain. Following them were more than 100 junior disciples. In a split second, dark wind and black smoke filled the sky, and poured into the mountain. As soon as the 4 of them entered, they rushed towards the main hall. However, when they had just arrived at the inner room, the silver-bearded old Taoist in the lead felt his body stop, as if he had been forcefully fixed in place by an invisible qi. Instantly, a terrified expression appeared on his face, and he roared, It's the heaven and earth seal, retreat quickly. But it was already too late. The 2 Linqing Monastery elders who were already hiding outside the hall acted at the same time and blocked their path of retreat. Han Wangke looked at them coldly, and with a shake of his sleeves, a vast amount of water rose up from behind him and surged upwards. The 4 of them were trapped by the heaven and earth seal technique and were attacked from the front and back, so they could only use their treasures to defend with all their might. But this time, the Linqing Monastery's side had thought things through and had already considered the possibility of a backup plan, and in just a moment, the 4 of them had exhausted all their methods and were killed one by one under the siege. Seeing that the biggest threat had been eliminated, Song Hong no longer had any fear and immediately ordered the 2 elders to bring the disciples to kill their way to the monastery, wanting to completely annihilate the enemies this time. Han Wangke and Peng Yuzhou had their own status and would not lower themselves to chase after those juniors, so they sat in front of the monastery and waited for news. Very quickly, the night passed, and when it was 5:15 in the morning, the sky was already slightly bright, and a flying light could be seen flying over from afar. Han Wangke's spirit rose and he said, Junior brother Kai is back. The flying light descended, and Kai Rongju appeared, and with a wave of his sleeve he walked forward, and cupped his hands, saying, "Senior brother, little brother was fortunate enough to not disappoint you." Han Wonka revealed a smile. This time he had killed all 5 Yuanying elders, and this trip was already a success, and he would be able to account for himself when he returned. At this moment, Kai Rongju lowered his voice and said, "That person's movement technique is not bad. Little brother has chased after him for a night, and just now has caught up, but accidentally discovered that 200 miles away from here, there is a secret cave that goes all the way to the depths of the cave, and is suspected to be a place where turbid Yin spiritual chi gathers." Han Wonka was a little surprised, and he frowned and said, "No wonder so many demonic cultivators have their eyes on Linqing Monastery, so there is this reason. Where turbid Yin spiritual chi gathers, it is very likely to become a demonic cave. If they were on the side of the demonic sect, they would definitely try to occupy it, and Linqing Monastery was so close to that place, like a fishbone stuck in the throat. No matter what, they had to get rid of it." When Song Hong heard that there was a turbid Yin underground cave so close to the mountain gate, he was also very shocked. If that place really became a demonic cave, then Linqing Monastery would never have a day of peace, so he said, "I implore the upper sect to use your strength to suppress that underground cave." At this moment, Peng Yuzhou interrupted, "Why are you in such a hurry? Why don't we keep it as bait, lure them to the hook, and then get rid of them one by one?" Han Wonka did not agree, and he shook his head, saying, "We can't do that. This is like nurturing a tiger, inviting calamity." Currently, there were so many demonic cultivators in the Donghua continent, and there were even more places where turbid Yin spiritual chi gathered. There was no reason to focus on one place, and the only way was to disperse one place. He immediately made a decision and said, "There may still be demonic cultivators in that place. Junior brother Kai, martial nephew Peng, quickly follow me. We must get rid of this turbid Yin underground cave." Chapter 781. Half a day after Linqing Monastery was rescued, Zhang Yan received news that the hundreds of demonic cultivators had been annihilated and not a single one had escaped. It could be considered as the greatest loss of the demonic sect in the past 100 years. What surprised him was that the letter mentioned that the 3 of them had accidentally discovered a place where the turbid Yin chi gathered. They had already gone to investigate to see if they could disperse it. He nodded slightly. If he was at his place, he would have done the same. In the past 10,000 years, countless demonic sects had been destroyed by Xian sect. But among the demonic sects, other than the 6 major sects, there were still many small sects that existed in the world. Many of them did not lack good inheritances, they just lacked a spiritual land. If this crypt was not destroyed, it would still attract countless demonic sections. But because of the different terrains, the crypts and spiritual caves were also different. If it was an ordinary place where Yin Chi gathered, it would be easy to deal with. But if it was hidden deep underground, reaching deep into the abyss, then it was not something that the Yuanying cultivators could deal with. He placed the letter aside and his gaze suddenly became deeper. This time, he had directly used the Yuanying cultivators to fight. Especially with Peng Yuzhou, a 3rd-stage realm cultivator, it was equivalent to sending a letter of challenge to the 6 demonic sections. Now, it was up to them to see how they would respond. But no matter what, there was one thing that he had to be prepared for. Since the other party had failed in Linqing Monastery, if they made a move, there was a high possibility that they would try to regain their face there. There was no need to summon these 3 people back immediately. They could wait there for a period of time. After the altar of clear nether heavenly lake was erected, he could order Su Jing to go to the monastery and rearrange the mountain gate formation that was mostly damaged. Blood Soul Sect. Ancient Spring Stage. Below the 10,000 Zhang crypt, there was a spacious stone platform that was carved out from the mountain. There were bright pearls here and it was magnificent. There was a warm breeze and flowers were blooming. On both sides of the old roots of the green vines, there were thousands of beautiful birds, pecking at their feathers and chirping unceasingly. 3 li to the left of the platform. It was a sloping land. Further away, there was a misty and hazy lake. Under the shine of the pearls, the shadows were blurred. It was a riot of colors. There were hundreds of boats floating on the lake. The people on the boat were all female disciples of the sect. They wore light muslin clothes and rain hats. All of them had slender figures, delicate and charming. There were disciples of the Blood Soul sect present, and there were also disciples of the subsidiary sections. There were more than 1,000 people seated on the stage. At this moment, they were discussing animatedly, as if they were arguing about something. One of the disciples with a tall hat and wide sleeves held up a letter and said hatefully, "This time, our Blood Soul sect lost the most disciples, and an elder died in this battle. That Zhang Yan is really despicable." The person sitting at the side had a calm expression on his face as he said, "So what? Zhang Yan was number 1 in the sword duel over 100 years ago. Even Marshal Uncle Gao, who was a genius, was killed by him. Heaven's will is regular, eliminating the weak and preserving the strong. This person has such ability, so naturally he is qualified to do such a thing. If Marshal Brother Wu is not convinced, when your cultivation has reached a certain level, you can go and find one of them to determine the winner." Being rebutted, Priest Wu felt a little embarrassed, but he had nothing to say. Although many cultivators of the demon sect felt that once the demon tribulation started, Xian Gate would definitely be suppressed, but in reality, after being suppressed for thousands of years, there was a sense of fear deep in their hearts. It was not something that could be wiped away in just a few hundred years. Most of the people seated here were Ming Qi and Mystic Light disciples, and the highest cultivation level was only core formation cultivators like them. Against Zhang Yan, who was one of the top 10 disciples of Qinsong school, not to mention them, even their own masters might not have the ability to do so. At this moment, Priest Wu looked in a direction and said, "Han Ji, I heard that you were a disciple of the Han clan, one of the 5 major clans of Qinsong. How do you evaluate Zhang Yan?" All the disciples looked in that direction, including the female disciple in the lake. They saw a young cultivator sitting among the crowd. He wore a black crown on his head, a deep robe with wide sleeves, and a belt around his waist. He sat cross-legged on a cattail hassock, looking relaxed and carefree. His eyebrows were green, but his figure was slightly thin and weak, leaving a deep impression on everyone. He stood up facing everyone's gaze, cupped his fists and said, "Although I met spiritual Master Zhang once in the past, we were not close friends. I'm not familiar with his character and behavior, so I can't comment on him. If I have to say something, I can only say it." Priest Wu said, "Let's hear it." Everyone was also curious. Han Ji looked around and said in a deep voice, "I'm 286 years old now, and I'm at the 2nd tier of core formation. Spiritual Master Zhang is younger than me. When I broke out of the door, he was only at Ming Qi cultivation level, and now he's already a 3rd tier of Yuanying cultivation level." After he finished speaking, he cupped his fists and sat down. The entire place became deathly silent. Although everyone present had heard of this matter, they had always subconsciously overlooked it. Now that they heard Han Ji speak of it, everyone felt shocked in their hearts. Reaching the 1st tier of core formation, reaching the nascent soul in 100 years, and reaching the 3rd tier of Yuanying in less than 300 years. Such a person's talent could no longer be measured with words, just like the bright moon in the sky, unreachable. Some disciples mumbled, "Among us, is there really someone who can defeat this person?" A few disciples clenched their fists tightly, and some even felt as if there was a huge rock pressing on their chests, making it difficult for them to breathe. Priest Wu saw that something was wrong and suddenly laughed. After attracting everyone's attention, he pointed at a few people and said, "Look at how dejected you all look. You're not worthy of being disciples of my Blood Soul sect. Now that luck is on my side, the rise of our spirit sect is the general trend, and no one can stop it. No matter how strong this Zhang Yan is, he's only one person. What can he do?" Hearing this, many of the disciples below finally regained some of their composure. Priest Wu took advantage of the situation and said, "The cultivators of my Blood Soul sect can't die in vain. Although we still can't destroy a great sect like Qinsong, we still don't care about a small Linqing monastery. We should ask the sect to send an elder to Green Ox Mountain and completely raze it to the ground to comfort our fellow disciples." Many voices of agreement immediately sounded from below, But Hanji stood up again and said loudly, "No." Junior brother Wu was displeased. He snorted and said, "Why not? Junior brother Han, don't tell me you're still on Qinsong's side?" In an instant, many unfriendly gazes stared at Hanji, as if they wanted to peel off a layer of his skin. However, Hanji ignored them. Just as he was about to speak, someone suddenly exclaimed, "The Enlightened One is here." The expressions of all the disciples present froze, and they immediately sat upright and still, not daring to make another sound. Hanji also hurriedly stopped speaking and knelt down. But after a few breaths, a bright rainbow light poured down like a waterfall, with a crisp sound, continuously falling on the jade platform. Countless drops of jade collided, scattering in all directions, and crystal beads fell. It only stopped after a long while. Then the rainbow light gathered, and a young Taoist appeared on top of the solitary stalagmite. His skin was white and smooth like beautiful jade, without a single flaw, his eyes as clear as a child's, the corners of his lips curled up into a slight smile, extremely pleasing to the eye. However, everyone was respectful, and they said in unison, "Disciples welcome enlightened Master Wen." Then, they all knelt down in unison. This person was the Blood Soul Sect's Enclosure Pool Master Wen Qingxiang, one of the 4 enlightened masters of the sect. He smiled lightly and said, "Just now, I've heard you talk about Zhang Yan. This person is the leader of this generation in Qinsong School, but it's a pity that we still can't find such a person in our Blood Soul Sect." His words were filled with regret and disappointment. When the disciples heard this, they immediately felt dissatisfied, but the other party was an enlightened master, so no one dared to refute. Wen Qingxiang looked at Hanji and smiled. "Just now, because of me, you haven't finished your words. Why don't you continue? I also want to hear your reasoning." Hanji nodded, straightened up, and said calmly, "In our Qinsong school, most of those who can become the top 10 first seats are the direct descendants of the enlightened masters. Only Zhang Yan is an exception. He doesn't have a deep foundation in the sect, so he will definitely seek battles everywhere to strengthen his position. If we take revenge, it will be exactly what he wants." Someone said indignantly, "Are we just going to ignore it?" Hanji shook his head and said, "No, we are cultivators. Success or failure does not depend on a moment. Why bother with the gains and losses now? It won't be too late for us to find him after we've made some progress in our cultivation. Moreover, Zhang Yan isn't someone who doesn't care about the consequences of his actions. Since he dares to do this, I believe that he has a backup plan. If we hastily jump out, wouldn't we be falling into his trap?" Wen Qingxiang did not hesitate to praise and said, "Well said." In fact, this matter was not so complicated. Xianmen had sent out a cultivator in the 3rd tier of Yuani. If they wanted to fight against him, they would need at least a cultivator of the same level. But those who had reached this level were all people who had the potential to become enlightened masters, so they could not be easily killed. Zhang Yan did not hide his purpose, so when Qingxiang could see at a glance that he was relying on the advantage of Xuanmen's current strength to push them over with a dignified method. It was up to them to see if they dared to take the attack. Their devil's doctrine had been suppressed for thousands of years, so their foundation was not as deep as that of Xianmen. It was obviously impossible for them to send out a cultivator in the 3rd tier for such a trivial matter that did not involve their fundamental interests, and no one in the 6 major sects would do so. However, this retreat brought about a bad consequence. Now that the devil cultivators were out in the world, they would definitely be afraid, and their actions would most likely be more restrained. At the very least, they wouldn't be as fearless as they were before in the short term. This was an overt plot. Whether they took it or not, the devil's doctrine would be the loser. However, although it was a fact that the devil's doctrine was inferior to Xianmen, these words could not be said to the affiliated sects and the junior disciples. Otherwise, the morale that they had accumulated over the past 100 years would be suppressed again. Hanji's speech was the best interpretation and was to his liking. It sounded like a good reason, and the key was that he was a disciple of the Han family of Qinsong, so it was even more convincing. He could use it to appease his subordinates, so he said, "Hanji, Come to my cave residence at noon tomorrow. His fellow disciples all looked at him with envy, but most of them were filled with jealousy and hatred. 1,000 feet above the stone platform, there was a cave abode in the air. Another when Qingxiang sat there, and the person sitting opposite him was exactly the same as him. The two of them seemed to be looking at each other in a mirror, and they were playing a game of chess. The first one laughed and said, "If you say so, it will attract the jealousy and hatred of Han Ji's fellow disciples. Once he leaves the ancient spring stage, he may not be able to keep his life." But the one opposite said indifferently, "That's right. Let's see how he deals with it. If he really can enter the cave residence at noon tomorrow, why don't I give him a chance?" Chapter 782. Han Wonka and the rest traveled underground for a day and night, but they still had not reached the bottom of the spiritual cave. The deeper they went, the more branching paths there were. After making another turn, Han Wonka gestured for them to stop, and the three of them landed on a strange rock. His gaze looked towards the seemingly bottomless and deep cave, and he said in a low voice, "This cave is really hidden too deep. If we go any further, we'll probably reach the earth lung. If the demonic cultivators occupy this place, then they'll definitely leave behind restrictions, but we didn't see any obstructions along the way. There's definitely a problem here." Kai Rongju seemed to understand something and suddenly raised his head. "Senior Marshal Brother is saying that this place is not actually occupied by demonic cultivators? Yesterday, he secretly chased that person here, and when he fought with him, his talisman accidentally hit a mountain rock, causing it to collapse. Only then did he discover this hidden place. At that time, he thought that this matter was extremely urgent and hurriedly turned back, so he did not carefully examine it." Han Wonka said in a low voice, "That's not the case. They gathered their forces to attack Linqing Monastery because of this spiritual cave. What I mean is that the spiritual opportunity here is not known, so we must have taken the wrong path. The right path should be somewhere else." Peng Yuzhou said, "No matter what, the demonic cave's turbidine qi is deposited below. As long as we destroy that place, we won't have to worry about anything else." Han Wonka shook his head. "We can't go any further. Who knows how many more days we will have to travel. This time, I did not think it through and was not prepared. If the demonic sect has any arrangements above, we will be in danger. Let's turn back." Peng Yuzhou was extremely unwilling and said loudly, "Uncle Master, you are too cautious. This time, we have already killed all the demonic cultivators, not a single one escaped. What ambush are you afraid of?" Han Wonka could not help but laugh. "Just now, this martial nephew Peng is trying to persuade us to leave this spiritual cave so that we can lure the demonic cultivators. Now, he is anxious to accomplish something. With this many times, no wonder Uncle Master Shin said that he cherishes his body when doing great things, forgets his life when seeing small benefits. Looks like the Chun clan captured him. There is a reason for that." He shook his head and said in a profound tone, "Martial nephew Peng, we can't run away from this place. Once we've made the preparations, we'll go to the underground cave first. It wouldn't be too late to clean it up later. Don't worry. You have contributed greatly to the annihilation of the enemy. When I return, I will make it clear to Bright Nether Prefecture." After saying that, he turned around and went back up. Kai Rongju followed him without hesitation. Peng Yuzhou originally wanted to go down and deal with this matter on his own, obtaining a great merit. But Han Wonka's words made it clear that he still needed to prove his merit. Feeling like his weakness was being grasped, he looked down at the ground and unwillingly stamped his foot, transforming into a streak of light and flying up. At this time, on the surface, a strange flying shuttle suddenly jumped out of the void. There were two people in it. One of them was hunchbacked and barefooted. His long hair was disheveled, and he was as thin as a skeleton. His body was shrouded in a churning mist, revealing only a pair of faint flickering eyes. The other person had a strange appearance. He had a high forehead and no facial features. His skin was pale, and his whole person seemed to be a mass of nothingness. The strange-looking cultivator's face suddenly split open, revealing a crack. A fierce eyeball rolled around for a while before slowly closing, saying, "There is no aura of our Spirit Gate disciples here. They were all dead at the time." The skinny cultivator sneered, "Chinsong School is powerful. We had already warned them not to rashly provoke us. Now that they suffered a great loss, they went to complain to the gate. Instead, they made us come here to clean up the mess." The strange-looking cultivator said, "Although this spirit cave isn't strong yet, it is deep enough to reach the earth aperture. If it were to be stored for several hundred years, it would at least be a small spirit cave. No wonder the gate values it so much." As the two spoke, they carefully lowered the flying shuttle. At this time, the strange-looking cultivator's expression suddenly changed, saying, "Senior brother, look." The skinny cultivator's eyes narrowed. He saw a large hole in the mountain wall. It looked like it was made by a magic treasure. He said with a serious expression, "Not good, we were a step too late. This place has already been discovered by the Celestial Gate." The strange-looking cultivator's body suddenly trembled, and he hurriedly said, "Senior brother, there are people coming up from below. Their cultivation is far higher than ours. Retreat quickly." The skinny cultivator was terrified. The letter said that the other party had a great cultivator at the third level of the nascent soul realm, and if he was trapped by the restrictive lock technique, then it would be difficult for him to escape. Thus, he didn't dare to hesitate, and with a sudden shake of the flying shuttle, he was already several hundred meters away, and with another dash he disappeared into the clouds. After the two of them were 1,000 miles away, they felt that there was no longer any danger. Only then did they stop the flying shuttle. The skinny cultivator hid his hands in his sleeves and sighed, "It's a pity about that spirit cave." The strange-looking cultivator rejoiced, "Senior brother, why do you say so? That place is so close to Linqing Monastery. It will be leaked sooner or later. When that time comes, if Zhang Yan comes again, what will you and I do?" The skinny cultivator deeply agreed. Back then, they had barely survived from Zhang Yan's hands, and they didn't want to go back and face him again. At this moment, he suddenly saw a black smoke flying over from afar. His expression turned solemn, and he reached out to grab it. He immediately condensed the black smoke into a ball, and it turned into a flying letter. He opened it and couldn't help but jump, and he shouted, "Bastard! Whose idea was this?" The strange-looking cultivator was puzzled, and he asked, "Why are you angry, senior brother?" The skinny cultivator's hand trembled slightly, and he said angrily, "The sect sent a letter, ordering us to quickly go to Clear Nether Heavenly Lake. We must keep an eye on that Zhang Yan's every move." The strange-looking cultivator was startled, and it took him a long time to come back to his senses. He said in a deep voice, "Isn't there a sect's disciple already arranged there? Why do we suddenly need to go?" The skinny cultivator put away the flying letter in annoyance, and he sighed, "There's no need to say anything. Something must have gone wrong again, and that's why they thought of us. But with the order, we have to obey it." After the two discussed for a while, they dilly-dallied towards the great lake of Dragon Abyss. The flying shuttle was fast, but it took them 4 to 5 days to reach Clear Nether Heavenly Lake. However, because of the fear in their hearts, they didn't dare to get too close, and they sent out a talisman letter to summon them from afar. After waiting for 2 hours, they saw a smoke-baleful chi flying over, and they immediately sent out a spell to greet it. That person was very cautious, and after circling 2 more times, he came up. When he reached the clouds, he saw a black-robed Taoist retracting his pill-baleful chi, and he came forward to greet them. Disciple Liao Fengtong greets the 2 uncle masters. The skinny cultivator said with a cold expression, "The sect hurriedly summoned us here. Do you know the reason?" Liao Fengtong braced himself and said, "Speaking of this matter, it's my fault. Recently, Clear Nether Heavenly Lake has sent out many disciples, and they are building altars within a radius of 1,000 miles. It seems like they are going to set up an array door inside. Disciples' cultivation is low, and I feel that I can't take on such a big responsibility, so I can only report to the sect." The skinny cultivator was startled, and he looked around vigilantly. Seeing that there was nothing wrong, he relaxed slightly, and he pondered for a while. "If that's the case, then I can't blame you." "You can't be blamed. Go back to the sect, leave this place to us. Liao Fengtong handed over a jade scroll with both hands. This is disciple's record. It might be of help to the two uncle masters. After the other party accepted it, he bowed. He lowered his head, and the cloud continued to escape from the surface. In the blink of an eye, several months passed. Zhang Yan didn't wait for the devil sects to come for revenge. Instead, when the devil cultivators of East Flower North heard about this, they were all terrified, and they all disappeared without a trace. But he didn't think that this was a calm sea. Even if the 6 great devil sects didn't make a move, it was inevitable that some small sects would come out to stir up trouble. Thus, he sent out flying letters everywhere, ordering the disciples stationed there to be more careful than before. On this day, he was meditating in the sect, but a boy from the floating heavenly palace came to say that the refined hut had been refined, and asked him to go to the Fangchen courtyard to get it. After Zhang Yan ordered Jingyu to send the boy away, he merged his Dharma body with his physical body, and came out of the cave abode. He rode the cloud and headed east, and in less than a minute he arrived in front of the Fangchen courtyard. As if they sensed his arrival, countless talisman flew up from the 2 opposite flying peaks below, and gathered into a wide cloud ladder, extending forward until his feet stopped just now. At the same time, a tall and handsome Taoist in a yellow robe walked out, with a cloud above his head that looked like crystal ice. It was Yu Chongyang, who was known as the 2 talents of Qinsong. He came up and bowed, saying, "Jinren Zhang, it's been a long time." Zhang Yan returned the bow and smiled. "So it's Jinren Yu, is Vice Headmaster Qiao here?" Yu Chongyang replied, "Headmaster Qiao has been reincarnated more than 10 years ago, and now the position of Vice Headmaster is held by I." Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He didn't expect that Headmaster Qiao had already passed away after more than 100 years. There were 9 courtyards in Qinsong School, and most of the headmasters were Yuanying elders who had high seniority in the school but had no hope of achieving Dao. It was just a title, and they usually didn't show up, and the secular affairs were all handled by the vice headmaster, who was the actual headmaster. It was just that if this generation wasn't under the top 10 disciples or the heavenly grotto, they had no hope of entering the 3 upper halls, and if they didn't have the opportunity, it would be difficult for them to advance further in Dao. This Yu Chongyang was slightly older than him, and now that he had cultivated Yuanying, his aptitude was also extraordinary among his peers, and it was a pity that he was buried this time. After thinking for a while, he said, "Today, I came here on the orders of the headmaster to take the divine insignia essence hut." Yu Chongyang moved sideways and said, "The headmaster's decree has arrived. Please come this way, Jinren." Zhang Yan smiled, lightly riding the wind, and followed him up the cloud ladder into the mountain. Not long after, they arrived in front of the Taoist palace at the peak. Landing on the empty ground in front of the palace, Yu Chongyang flicked a talisman with his finger, and it hit the stone tablets on both sides. The restriction was immediately activated by him, and with a rumbling sound, a formation door opened below, revealing a square stone altar, and on top of it was a refined abode that was 30 feet tall, with high eaves. Yu Chongyang looked over, and a hint of envy appeared in his eyes. This item was personally made by the headmaster of Qinsong, Qin Maobai. Even if it was taken by the Jinren of the Heavenly Grotto, he probably wouldn't be able to do anything for a while. He sighed inwardly and said, "Jinren, please watch, I'll take my leave first." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Headmaster Yu, if you're bored staying in the school, you can come find me at the heavenly lake of clear serenity." Yu Chongyang took a deep look at him, bowed, and took his leave. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves, and went into the refined abode. When he reached the inner room, he looked around, and saw that the place was simple and unadorned, without any extravagant decorations. In the middle, there was a pool platform that was half a foot high, and it was filled with clear spiritual water. It was where the Dharmakaya stored his physical body after traveling. On the 4 corners, there were copper bells that could sense the wind and clouds in all directions, and if there was any danger, it would be immediately detected. On the top of the hall, there was a piece of translucent, flawless, and sparkling elixir jade. This item was born from the spiritual eye of Qinsong school. Breathing in and regulating one's breath with this item was no less than cultivating in the floating heavenly palace. Just one of this item was enough for a cycle of 60 years. On the pool platform, there was a palm-sized incense burner, and it was spitting out 3 qi-treasured smoke. This smoke moistened the spirit, nourished the body, and warmed the spirit. This treasure couldn't be used by cultivators who weren't in the 3rd stage of yuaning. After a long period of nourishment, the divine qi would sense it, and there was a high chance that it could be refined into a real spirit. It could help cultivators take care of the refined abode, and it could also be used to control restrictions and defend against external enemies. Zhang Yan walked forward, entered the pool, and sank down. Not long after, there was spiritual qi jade water entering his acupoints, moistening his entire body. His divine sense moved, and in an instant, the refined hut turned into a beam of clear light and flew through the air. When the refined abode stabilized, he looked down and saw that in less than a breath he had actually escaped from the Fengshan courtyard and arrived in the sky above the heavenly lake of clear serenity. He couldn't help but smile. Now that he had obtained this item, and there was nothing to do inside or outside, he only needed to inform the sect leader, and he could leave for Shaoqing in a few days. Chapter 783. P.S. Sorry, things are more troublesome than I thought. I couldn't make it back in time. After Zhang Yan returned to the cave, he sank the divine seal essence hut to the bottom of the serene lake. He only stopped when it reached a depth of 3,000 feet. This place was protected by the mountain gate formation on the outside and protected by the water restriction spell on the inside. It was also very well hidden. Hiding his body here would ensure his safety. Even if a great enemy attacked the mansion, he would be able to escape to another place before he reached the water. After sitting in the essence hut for a while, he felt the spiritual energy flowing into his acupuncture points. When it flowed around his body, it was warm and comfortable. It was much better than what he usually felt. He didn't return to the cave and just breathed in and out. He sat in meditation for 5 days and nights before his qi returned to his dantian and he woke up. When he opened his eyes, there seemed to be a flash of cold lightning that flickered for a few breaths of time before disappearing. He raised his head and looked up, only to see that the pill jade hanging in the air had shrunk slightly. He couldn't help but nod to himself. This item was indeed extraordinary. After reaching the 3rd level of the nascent soul stage, it was extremely difficult to increase one's transcendence energy by a single step. Moreover, his transcendence energy was especially vigorous, like a bottomless ocean, so it was even more difficult to accumulate and advance. However, after meditating for a while, he clearly felt a trace of improvement. After looking at it for a while, he was puzzled. Although this item was difficult to obtain, there were many of them. When Zhou Chongju had entered the Azure Dragon sect, he had been bestowed several of them at once, and with the contributions he had made to the sect, it was unreasonable to only give him one. Thinking about this, his expression changed. Was the sect leader hinting at something? After thinking about it carefully, he felt that there was only one possibility. It was the time when the demon's cave would appear. Although all the sects knew that the devil's cave would appear in the world within 100 years, the exact date was still unknown. Whoever knew would have the upper hand. If that was the case, then the time left to learn the sword was only 60 years. His eyes narrowed and he thought, looks like I need to set a schedule earlier. He lightly shouted and let his Dharma body escape from his body. He used the water escape technique and returned to the inner hall. Jingyu saw him coming back. He came up and reported, the Zhenren came to visit yesterday, saying that he has something to discuss with Master. Zhang Yan's thoughts changed. Zhang Boyan rarely took the initiative to look for him. Perhaps there was something important. Thereupon he said, right now I am free. Go and invite Mr. Zhang here. They didn't have to wait long. As soon as Zhang Boyan entered the cave abode, he went up to pay his respects and sat down. My disciple, Zhao Yang, wishes to make a trip to the 6 great demon sects to gain experience. It's just that I have some connections elsewhere, so I've come to the Manor Lord to ask if this is possible. If it's inappropriate, I can make him give up on this idea." Zhang Yan thought about it for a moment. Zhao Yang's cultivation methods were all from the devil path. If he only cultivated in the clear nether heavenly lake, he might be able to increase his cultivation, but without the devil head, it would be difficult for him to cultivate some powerful divine abilities and Dao arts. It was no wonder that he had such thoughts. He thought for a moment and smiled. Based on what I see, there shouldn't be any huge battles between the Xian sect and the demon sect in the next few decades. Zhao Yang can go out and search for opportunities. Zhang Boyan got the confirmation and smiled. He stood up and bowed. "Then I thank the Manor Lord on behalf of my disciple." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There's no need to thank me. It's just that Zhao Yang is alone outside. I hope that he can keep his heart." Zhang Boyan nodded his head solemnly. "Manor Lord, I will." After sending Zhang Boyan away, Zhang Yan thought for a while and then rode the astral wind towards the floating celestial palace. Because his identity was different now, every move he made was a big matter. Since he had decided to go to Shaoqing, he naturally had to bid farewell to the sect master. After returning to the side hall, the boy went inside to report. After a while, he was led into the hall and saw Sect Master Qin. He went forward and greeted him. Sect Master Qin's expression was much more casual than before. He smiled and said, "Zhang Yan, is the refined hut to your liking?" Zhang Yan bowed and smiled. "Disciple thanks Sect Master for your generous gift. Although the refined hut is good, it still has some restrictions." Sect leader Qin chuckled and said with a deeper meaning in his words, "You don't have to be impatient. The sect will definitely not mistreat those who have made great contributions to the sect. You should first polish your skills and wait quietly for your opportunity." Zhang Yan's heart moved and he nodded. He raised his hands and bowed again, saying, "I'm here this time because I want to go to Shaoqing 3 days later, so I'm here to report to Sect Master." Sect Master Qin asked, "How are you going to go?" Zhang Yan said emotionally, "Since I'm going to Shaoqing with Sect Master's letter, I'll be representing Qinsong to go. I'll naturally set up a carriage and not disguise myself. I'll head there openly." He did this after careful consideration. Originally, the 3 great mystical sects each occupied their own area. Although they were friendly with each other, they did not disturb each other. However, if he did such a thing, people would suspect that the 2 sects were working together to deal with the great calamity. Before he figured out the 2 sects' motives, he dared to say that no one would dare to act rashly, be it the mystical or demonic sections. This was equivalent to him borrowing the power of the 2 sects to forcefully suppress the surging undercurrents. This way, he could ensure his safety during the period of learning the sword in Shaoqing. Sect Master Qin pondered for a while before saying, "You're quite considerate. In that case, I'll help you again. I'll appoint Miao Kun as the vice envoy to accompany you." Zhang Yan could naturally see the crux of it. Although Miao Kun had just now cultivated to the Yuaning realm, he was the sect master's disciple in name. His status was not ordinary. Yet, he was appointed as the vice envoy this time. Not only could it accentuate his high status, it could also show some seriousness. He immediately bowed and said, "Disciple thanks Sect Master." At this moment, in the clear nether heavenly lake, Zhao Yang quickly received the news that he could go out to train. He could not help but feel excited. He also could not wait any longer. After packing up a little, he bade farewell to his master Zhang Boyan and left the clear nether heavenly lake. However, he did not know where to go. Thinking that Shindong was in the Linqing monastery, he concealed his appearance and headed west. After traveling for over 10 days, he arrived at the foot of Green Bull Mountain and sent a letter inside. After a while, Shindong rode the pill fiend out. They exchanged a few words and then welcomed him into the cave abode. The Linqing monastery was very respectful to the disciples who came from the Qinsong. Shindong's cave abode was not big, but it was built in a valley filled with spiritual energy. There were many strange flowers and plants here, and the courtyards were arranged in picturesque disorder. It was very quaint and elegant. They sat down in the inner room. Zhao Yang said, "Junior apprentice brother Shin, I don't know how many years it will be before I return. Now, only you and I are from the Dongsheng continent, so I came to say goodbye to you. Shendong's eyes lit up and he asked, Senior apprentice brother Zhao is going to the Nether Spring sect? Zhao Yang thought about it and said, It has not been decided yet, but what I learned is the Nether Spring sect's techniques. I heard that there are many geniuses in the sect, which is why they can compete with the Shenmen. They have not declined for tens of thousands of years. I really want to go and take a look. When Shendong heard this, he could not help but feel envious. He said, The Nether Spring sect is a huge sect that has existed for tens of thousands of years. There are many elders in the sect. I want to learn a thing or two from them. I will benefit greatly. Zhao Yang laughed and said, How can there be such benefits? Listen to my master. Listen to master. The Nether Spring sect has many techniques to see through people's hearts. If you are not careful, you will be doomed. You need to go elsewhere to train and learn some methods to protect yourself. Shendong's expression changed, and he seemed to have thought of something. He said, Senior apprentice brother Zhao, I might have a way to help you with this. Zhao Yang asked curiously, What method does junior apprentice brother have? Shendong said, There is a spiritual cave 200 miles from here. I heard that it is a place where the yin energy of the earth gathers. A few days ago, 3 perfected ones from Qinsong School tried to suppress this place. However, the cave went deep into the abyss and they failed. They could only set up restrictions to cover it up. Now, many disciples from Linqing Monastery are entering there to cultivate and kill demons. Why don't you enter to cultivate as well? Zhao Yang couldn't help but be tempted when he heard this. He had also heard of the Sea-Eye Devil Cave of the Dark Azure sect, but he wasn't a Dark Azure sect disciple, so he didn't dare to go there to cultivate. If there was a spirit cave here, then there was no need to be in a hurry to go elsewhere. At this moment, a maid came in. Wan Fu said, Priest Shen, old Master Han has sent a few fresh carps. He said that they are rare delicacies. Priest Shen, please have a taste. Shendong smiled and said, I remember that senior apprentice brother loved delicacies when we were in Dongsheng continent. I don't have anything good here. Since senior apprentice brother Han has sent fresh fish, then why don't senior apprentice brother Zhao come and have a taste? You can go there later. Zhao Yang was not a pretentious person, so he readily agreed. After a few days, the news of Qinsong School sending Zhang Yan, the head of the top 10 disciples, to Shaoqing suddenly spread in Donghua continent. The head disciple, Miao Kuan, was sent to Shaoqing. This immediately caused a commotion in all directions, especially among the 6 major demonic clans. The 2 major sects of Donghua continent, one in the west and one in the north, usually went their own way, but if they joined hands, the situation would be like a pincer pressing down on them. They had no choice but to be afraid. Not only the demonic clans, but even Yuxiao School, one of the 3 major sects of Shenmen, was also a little uneasy. If these 2 sects joined hands, their strength would be too strong. They also sent people out to gather information, wanting to find out the truth. In an instant, the originally heated situation in Donghua continent suddenly calmed down. All the sects turned their gazes to the west. In front of Qinghong Palace of Shaoqing sect, a young Taoist with starry eyes and white teeth stood at the bottom of the stairs. He had been waiting here for an hour, but there was no sign of impatience on his face. At this moment, he suddenly heard the sound of a bell, and he saw a long stream of silver flowing down from the sky. It was vast and magnificent, like countless twinkling clusters of stars, and it illuminated the entire sky, causing it to be dazzling. He hurriedly closed his eyes and lowered his head to avoid being pierced by the brilliance. After a few moments, the surging spiritual vigor slowly subsided, and a deep voice came from the hall. It said, Ran Xiushu, what are you here for? Ran Xiushu cupped his hands and said, I am here for the matter of Qinsong School sending an envoy to visit Shaoqing. Eldest senior brother has not come out of seclusion for 100 years, and the Zenrens are not in the mood to care about external affairs. No one can make a decision, so how should we deal with this matter? At the end of his sentence, there was some helplessness in his tone. The voice was silent for a while, then said, Who is the envoy? Ran Xiushu bowed and said, The envoy is the head of the top 10 disciples of Qinsong, Zhang Yan, Jinren Zhang. The deputy envoy is Miao Kun, a registered disciple of the Qinsong sect leader. The voice raised a few octaves and only asked, "Is it Zhang Yan who helped apprentice nephew Sun during the sword duel of the 18 sects?" Ran Xiushu hurriedly said, "That's him." The voice was silent for a while, then said, "Since he is the envoy of Qinsong school, we should treat him with the courtesy of a sect leader. Pass down the order to our disciples to welcome him from 3,000 miles away. Anyone who enters this world who is not from our two sects will be killed." Chapter 784. On the first day of the 10th lunar month, Zhang Yan wore a black cloak and a magic crown. He rode on a flying carriage and left Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake for Shaoqing. His carriage could only be ridden by the head of the 10 great disciples of Feng Song. It looked like a large pagoda with 3 floors. The inner court was spacious and the eaves were like wings. There were 4 cloud sun golden locks on the outside and 8 flood dragon tendons on the inside that were connected to the blackwood. There were 2 carriage curtains on the left and right sides of the pagoda. They looked like Ganoderma umbrellas, fluttering in the air. The curtains were hung with 16 bells that jingled as they traveled. Inside each of the bells, there was a 10 feet tall imperial strongman with bulging muscles. The ones pulling the carriage were a pair of black flood dragons with long beards. Their backs arched like a hawk, their fins like fans, and their eyes were ferocious. They were 120 feet long, brandishing their claws and baring their fangs at times. If it wasn't for the puppet on their heads holding them in place, they would have already flown away. Behind the carriage were 4 Purple Light Academy managing elders, all of them Yuanying cultivation base. They rode on cranes and escorted Miao Kun along the way. The Flood Dragon carriage didn't travel far and arrived at the 9 Toon Stream Palace. Miao Kun had been waiting there for a long time. He was fat and had a round belly. He was wearing a loose robe and his hands were wrapped around a coiled python belt. He looked mighty, but his face was comical. He always had a smile on his face, making it hard for others to respect him. Seeing that the carriage had arrived, he cupped his hands and laughed loudly. "Junior brother Zhang, today I'm like a fly following the steed's tail. I'll accompany you to enjoy the glory." Zhang Yan stood on the pavilion and returned the greeting. He smiled. "Senior brother Miao, please get on the carriage." Miao Kun agreed. He put his sleeves behind his back and stepped on the astral wind. He boarded the carriage and entered the 3-storied building. He looked left and right, smacked his lips, and then raised his hand to pat the large pillar in the building. He sighed and said, "I have benefited from Shidi's light, otherwise I wouldn't have had the chance to ride this kind of carriage." Zhang Yan smiled. "Senior brother, you must be joking. Being the sect master's disciple is an opportunity that many people envy." Miao Kun sighed, feeling wronged. He waved his hand and said, "It's just a name. I don't know when Master will remember this disciple of mine." As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and his expression tightened. He looked around cautiously. He said, "Come out of my mouth. If it enters your ears, you won't be able to tell others." Zhang Yan smiled and said to the outside, "Let's go." The 2 drivers shouted at the same time. Mustering all his strength, he pulled the Flood Dragon's head and the Roar Dragon's head. 2 deafening dragon roars were heard, and then the wind and clouds rolled in from the west, causing the curtains to flutter. The flying carriage suddenly felt light, and in a flash it soared into the sky, facing up to the horizon. After a moment, a rumbling sound was heard, the pagoda trembled slightly, and then stabilized itself. Miao Kuncho lifted the bead curtain and saw that he had broken through the high clouds and was already above the extreme heaven. Right now he was flying westward. He said, "This road may not necessarily be peaceful. Zhang Shidi, since we have nothing to do, why don't we have a game of chess?" Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "That's fine." This pagoda could also gather qi and hide spirit, so meditating here was not much different from cultivating in the cave abode. But as Miao Kun said, there was no guarantee that there would be an accident, so he ordered Jing Yu to bring the chess pieces over, and the 2 of them started a game of chess. The speed of the twin flood dragon carriage was extremely fast. After traveling for a day and a night in the sky, it had already crossed the Donghua continent from north to west. Zhang Yan saw that the sky was gradually brightening, so he put down the chess pieces and walked to the top of the pagoda. He leaned against the railing and looked into the distance. He could vaguely see a huge shadow in the distant sky, vast and boundless, as if it was floating in the churning sea of clouds. He estimated that they would reach the Shaoqing sect's territory in at most another 2 hours, so he instructed the 2 drivers to slow down. Miao Kuan also walked out and stood beside him. He looked into the distance, and after looking for a while, he said, "I think that's where the Shaoqing sect is located, the Guanyang Great Peak Mound. It's indeed magnificent." Zhang Yan's gaze was fixed in front, and he slowly said, "That's right, it's here." Among the 10 great mystical sects, the Qinsong School's mountain gate was located in the Longyuan Great Marsh, while the Yuxiao School was located in the Moqiu Cliff, both of which were considered to be on the surface. Only the Shaoqing sect's main location was above the extreme heaven, looking down on the heaven and earth. This place was originally a high peak that rushed into the extreme heaven, and it once resonated with the Middle Pillar continent from afar. There was a land bridge that spanned across the River of Years, and they were originally one. Tens of thousands of years ago, the founder of the Shaoqing sect, Zhenren Hongba, split the 2 continents with a sword, splitting the mountains as a boundary. Since then, the 2 mountains faced each other across the river and never reunited. Zhang Yan looked for a while, and suddenly his eyes flashed. He looked in one direction and saw dozens of sword beams that were as bright as silver stars flying over from afar. At first glance, they seemed to be scattered messily, but upon closer inspection, there was a profound principle to it. The silver light caught up with the carriage and made a circle in the air, and the sword beams from all directions gathered together, turning into a cloud of clear qi. From within, a woman with a beautiful face appeared. She was in her 20s and had a slender waist. Her eyebrows were lightly brushed, and her hair was combed into a flying fairy bun. She wore a lotus robe, and her sleeves fluttered in the wind like a fairy. Above her head was a green cloud. She bowed to the carriage, and with a pleasant voice, she said, "I'm Incense Master Ping, a disciple of the Shaoqing Golden Water Ingtai sect. This time, I'm here to receive Zhenren Zhang's Dharma carriage on my master's order." Zhang Yan raised his hand to return the bow and said, "Thank you, Zhenren Ping." Incense Master Ping also bowed to Miao Kuan and the few elders of Purple Light Academy behind him, and then stepped on the cloud to accompany the carriage. After traveling for 1,000 miles, the sound of a sword was suddenly heard, and then a glaring conveyance light came from the sky. In an instant, the sky turned cold, and the cold air invaded the soul. A sword beam tore through the clouds and descended, and finally landed in front of the carriage. The 2 ink-black flood dragons seemed to be slightly uneasy and roared a few times at it, as if they were about to explode and devour people. Only then did they calm down. The sword beam turned, and a middle-aged Taoist of average height, with a lotus crown on his bun, came out. This person's eyes were as sharp as an eagle's, and he glanced at the front and back of the carriage. He bowed and said, "Shaoqing sect, Jingxiao Lingtai sect, Gu Tunan, I'm here to receive the Dharma decree to receive the messenger of the Qinsong. The road ahead is clear, and you may drive with ease." He seemed to be indifferent, and after the greeting, he went to the other side of the carriage like Incense Master Ping. He did not say a word, and just escorted the carriage forward. After another 1,000 miles, a ray of light leaped out of nowhere, and in an instant, it jumped to the left and right of the carriage and circled around. Then a cheerful young man walked out, wearing a loose white robe, a green belt around his waist, and a scarf on his head. He came up with a smile and said, "I'm Chen Yuaning, disciple of Yuan Tai. Greetings, Zhenren Zhang." Zhang Yan returned the greeting. At this moment, Miao Kuan came up and said, "Junior apprentice brother Zhang, Shaoqing came 3,000 miles to welcome you, and it's very courteous. This is not only a show of respect, but also a show of force. You must be careful later." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Even if it's not like that, it's not Shaoqing." After a while, the carriage finally arrived in front of the main gate of Guanyang Peak. Just now, they could not see it clearly from afar, but now that they looked, they saw two great watchtowers on the left and right, towering into the sky. They were slightly leaning forward, as if they could fall down on them at any time. Chen Yuaning pointed at the two mountains and said with a hint of pride in his voice, "Shenren Zhang, these two great watchtowers, one of them hangs over the clouds, and the other sees the sun. They were originally a high peak, but later, the founding master felt that they were blocking the way, so he casually slashed his sword, and they became like this." Zhang Yan looked up, and these two mountain watchtowers reached up to the high clouds, majestic and towering. Zhenren Hongba casually slashed them apart, so one could imagine what kind of supernatural power he had. Suddenly, a Taoist Qin Yun flew down from the watchtower peak and came over to greet them. Chen Yuaning took the initiative to go up to him, and the two exchanged a few words before he returned to the peak. Incense Master Ping, who was at the side, bowed and said, "Please wait for a moment, honored guest. Once the formation of this mountain gate is removed, you can enter." Miao Kuan asked curiously, "Could it be that your honorable sect doesn't have a formation door to enter?" Incense Master Ping smiled faintly. "Taoist Miao might not know this, but usually, as long as a disciple of my Shaoqing sect is still in the mountain gate, we don't need this formation. It's just that the emissary of your sect has arrived, and we're both from the upper echelons of Xianmen, so to show our respect, it's activated." Miao Kuan couldn't help but be startled, and he looked at the mountain gate, but the smile on his face faded a little. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. Shaoqing sect was a sect of sword cultivators, so their way of doing things was especially different from other sections. In fact, for the three major Xianmen, it was the same whether there was a mountain gate formation or not, as long as there were people from the heavenly grotto heaven in the sect. After a moment, a rumbling sound was heard, and the profound formation was removed. The clouds dispersed, revealing a suspended path in the middle, and at the end was a heavenly gate, towering in the sky, just like a rock spreading its wings, its beak facing the east, and its head raised towards the sun, as if it was going to ride the wind and ascend. However, on both sides of the suspended path, violent wind whistled. Even from a few miles away, one could feel the wind penetrating one's flesh and piercing one's bones, causing the suspended path to shake continuously. Chen Yuaning pointed again and said, "That place is called the Canal Wind Gap, and the wind is drawn in from the second heaven. If outsiders can pass through here, they can be Shaoqing's esteemed guests." However, Taoist Zhang is a Qinsong emissary, so there's naturally no need for you to barge in. I'll order someone to remove the restriction now. Although he said that, his feet did not move at all. Zhang Yan smiled and glanced at Miao Kuan. The latter understood and said, "Since that's the case, please remove the restriction quickly." Chen Yuaning was stunned. As a Shaoqing disciple, he was actually a little unconvinced by Zhang Yan. Now that he had a rare opportunity, he wanted to use it to test Zhang Yan's ability. However, he did not expect Zhang Yan to not accept his attack at all. He scratched his head, and could only turn around to remove the restriction resentfully. Zhang Yan's expression was indifferent. As the first seat of the 10 great disciples of Qinsong school, and the number one in the sword duel competition among the 18 sects, he had long since passed the stage of proving his ability. Even if he did not barge through this door, no one would think that he could not pass through this place with his magic power. Not long after, the astral wind slowly dispersed. The two drivers on the carriage pulled the soft ropes, and the two black flood dragons shook their bodies and pulled the carriage inwards. In just a moment, they passed through the heavenly gate with Peng's head. The sky brightened, and a huge mountain appeared in front of them. It stood in the middle of the sea of clouds, and there were stars beside it. Thousands of floating islands floated around it. The sky was bright, and the clouds were floating. The air was piercingly cold. Flashes of swords could be seen flying back and forth, and the sound of swords would ring in the sky from time to time. At this moment, a streak of clear light flew over, as if it was leaping through the void. After a few flashes in the air, it arrived in front of them. A green-robed Taoist with distinct features and a high-nose bridge walked out from the sword light. When Qin Yuaning and the other two saw him, they all came forward and bowed, saying, "Senior brother Sun." Sun Huaying pointed at Zhang Yan and said, "This is my friend. With me here to receive you, you can all leave." Chapter 785. Sun Huaying and the third-generation disciple, Qin Chenzi, had both attended the sword competition gathering before and had a reputation in the sect. Chen Yuaning and the other two did not dare to disobey his words. They bowed and left to take care of Miao Kuan and the others. Zhang Yan cast his gaze over and sized him up. It had been more than 100 years since they last met, and Sun Sun's cultivation had improved rather quickly. The high cloud above his head had already formed 3 clouds, but he had yet to show the signs of Huaxian's unity. Zhang Yan smiled as he cupped his fist and bowed, saying, "Ever since we parted in a hurry during the last sword battle, it has already been more than 100 years. How is fellow Taoist Sun?" Sun Huaying returned the greeting and said, "Thanks to your help, I managed to escape. Since then, I've been practicing my sword skills in the sect. It's a pity that Feng Haiyang has already been killed by you. Otherwise, I'd definitely go and learn from him again." Towards the end, there was a hint of regret in his tone. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Before I killed Feng Haiyang, he said something. Would you like to know, fellow Taoist Sun?" Sun Huaying had personally experienced Zhang Yan's skills. One could imagine how frightening it was when Zhang Yan fought with him alone in the Star Stone. When she heard the words spoken before his death, she unconsciously revealed an attentive expression and said, "What did he say?" Zhang Yan said, "He said that there will be 3 heavy tribulations within 1,000 years and asked if I could avoid them." Sun Huaying's eyes narrowed and asked, "How did you answer?" Zhang Yan laughed and said, "I said that the heavy tribulations are our opportunities." Sun Huaying was moved and cheered, "Fellow Taoist, you have guts." Zhang Yan said, "Since there are heavy tribulations in the world, the 9 continents will have their own heroes. Why do you have to worry about not being able to find an opponent?" Sun Huaying nodded seriously and said, "Fellow Taoist, you're right." Then he looked at Zhang Yan and sighed. "It's a pity that you're not a disciple of Shaoqing. I can only discuss techniques with you and not swords. It's a pity." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There might be a chance." However, Sun Huaying did not think much about it. He knew that Zhang Yan was skilled in flying swords, but he had not learned the proper technique after all. He only talked about the sword Dao. They might not even be as good as the junior disciples in the sect. He didn't mean to belittle them. He admired Zhang Yan for being able to reach where he was today without the guidance of a master. However, the Shaoqing 10,000-year sword legacy contained the blood, sweat, and sweat of countless predecessors, as well as the wisdom of sages. This kind of inheritance, it wasn't something that could be easily overcome with talent alone. He stepped sideways. He said, "Originally I wanted to invite fellow Taoist to my immortal's cave, but this time fellow Taoist is the Qin Song envoy, so you have to go to the East Dynasty funeral parlor. I'll send someone to inform Uncle Ing first. If there are no accidents, we should be able to see him tomorrow." The Shaoqing sect Master Yu usually didn't do anything. His eldest disciple, Ing Chuanqiu, was in charge of the internal and external affairs. In terms of the latter's position in the sect, it was roughly similar to that of Meng Zhen. Zhang Yan was also very clear about this situation, so he nodded and cupped his hands, "Then I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist." Sun Huaying led the way in front and led the group to the pavilion. To show his respect, Zhang Yan got off the carriage and flew in the air. Along the way, he actually saw the sound of sword lights flying and fighting on 4 or 5 floating platforms. There were also faint shouts and whistles. It was obvious that someone was fighting there. However, Sun Huaying, who was beside him, looked like he was already used to it. He couldn't help but think, "I heard that there are fights in the Shaoqing sect every day. It seems that it's true." Sun Huaying saw that he was paying attention to the floating islands around, so she pointed and said, "This is called the sword platform. Every disciple in our sect who has sword consciousness in their sword pellet can build one here. After 10,000 years, there are already more than 3,000 of them." There were over 1,000 disciples in the Shaoqing sect, yet there were only over 200 people that could truly be called sword cultivators. But in the entire world, not a single person dared to underestimate the Shaoqing sect, and the sword platform that floated in midair was the proof of its 10,000 years of inheritance. Zhang Yan looked around and saw that many sword platforms had a sword pill placed at the highest point of the platform. It was like a pearl-flying star, shining brilliantly. He was a little surprised, so he asked, "Fellow Taoist Sun, what's the reason for this?" Sun Huang was silent for a moment, then she said, "These sword pills are all left by the deceased disciples in the past. They are placed here to wait for their master." The sword pill was the most chaste and pure item. If every disciple obtained a sword and nurtured a true consciousness and true spirit, they would enter Tao in the next life. If the sword pill and their divine heart were in agreement, it would still chase after them to recognize their master. However, those who could become sword cultivators were 1 in 10,000. After reincarnating, even if they could enter Tao again, they might not have this kind of talent. Therefore, more than 90% of these sword pills were still ownerless. At this time, Sun Huang pointed at an empty sword platform and said, "Back then, senior apprentice brother Ban cultivated here." However, since his whereabouts were unknown, even the sword pill was nowhere to be found. Zhang Yan's heart moved slightly and he asked, "Fellow Taoist Sun, are you talking about the once famous Taoist Ban Xiaoming?" Sun Huang sighed and said, "Yes, senior apprentice brother Ban's talent is above mine. If not for an accident, he should have been the one to fight." When Zhang Yan heard this, he seemed to be in deep thought. Sun Huang pointed to the distance again, and he raised his voice and said, "Fellow Taoist, please look over there. Those are the Zhangshu, Zichen, and Qinglai platforms. They were left behind by our Shaoqing sect's 3 ascended spiritual masters." Zhang Yan looked in the direction he pointed and saw that there were 3 mountain-like platforms that hung high in the sky. They were majestic and towering, standing proudly in the void. There were also 3 beams of light that shot into the sky, shining brightly like the bright moon in the sky. Compared to them, the thousands of floating platforms below looked like tiles and dust. The East Dynasty platform was the Shaoqing funeral parlor. It was on the east side of the Guanyang Big Peak. However, only the Qinsong and Yuxiao sects could be invited to this place. When Zhang Yan and the others arrived and settled down, Sun Huang said, "Fellow Taoist, you came at the right time. These few days, my sect is recruiting disciples. It's still early, why don't I bring fellow Taoists there to take a look?" Zhang Yan was instantly interested. Other than Qinsong, Huanzhen, Shaoqing, and Lishan sects, most of the 10 sects were controlled by aristocratic families. The rules for selecting disciples were similar. Due to the Shaoqing sect's cultivation of sword cultivators, they especially valued natural endowments. As a result, no clan would be able to survive for long. Their method of selecting disciples was also different from the other sections. Since he was here now, he might as well take a look. He said joyfully, "Then I'll have to trouble you." After talking to Miao Kuan and the others, he went with Sun Huang. After flying for a while, he followed and landed in front of a temple. Sun Huang said, "Selecting disciples is a matter of the lower peak. We don't have to go back and forth. There's a Xuanji spring here, and we can observe everything in the sect." At this moment, a Taoist steward ran out of the hall and bowed. "Why are you here, spiritual master?" Sun Huang said, "I brought the Qinsong spiritual master here to see the scenery of the sect. Open the prohibition. Let me take a look." The Taoist quickly agreed. He waved the horsetail whisk in his hand, and the door of the hall opened. He then bowed and said, "Please go ahead, spiritual master." The 2 of them entered the hall. Zhang Yan looked up. 1,000 feet away, there was a mountain wall covered in moss. There was a clear spring that flowed down from above, forming a stream. However, what was strange was that after the water flowed down, it formed dozens of whirlpools. In each whirlpool, a scenery appeared, and a few of them seemed to be the places that they were passing by just now. Sun Huang raised her sleeve and waved it to completely disperse the vortex. After that, a brilliant sword light flew out from within the cloud and descended into the water. Instantly, it erupted with light, and it actually stirred up the river and created another vortex. After a few breaths of time, a scene appeared within it. Zhang Yan walked to the side of the stream in 2 steps and looked down. He saw that there was a huge valley with a steep cliff on the side, and it was like a line from the north to the south. At this moment, there were thousands of people slowly climbing up there, and when he looked carefully, he saw that most of them were teenagers of 15 or 16 years old, and there were even children of 7 or 8 years old. Sun Huaying said, "Every 10th month, the sect opens its doors. Anyone who is interested in joining my Shaoqing Taoist only needs to climb over this dragon fin's back alone, and they will be able to join my sect." Zhang Yan knew that the Shaoqing Taoist disciple selection would not be so simple. This was the first test, but it was possible for someone of such a young age to pass this test alone. Sun Huaying waved her sleeves, and the scenery in the water changed. They arrived in front of a cliff. The surrounding clouds surged like ice, and the grass and trees were covered with a layer of frost. It was obvious that the mountain was much higher. Compared to just now, there were only a few tens of people in front of the cliff. Sun Huaying said, "If you pass just now, you will be able to learn a set of breathing techniques. If you succeed in it, you will be able to come to this mountain in the 2nd year and try the heart-refining chain." Zhang Yan asked, "What is the heart-refining chain?" Sun Huaying pointed to the front of the cliff and said, "Fellow Taoist, please take a look." Zhang Yan focused his gaze and saw that there were only misty clouds. Apart from that, there was nothing else. At this moment, a young man carefully took a step towards the space in front of the cliff. His body paused and he actually stood still. Then he took another step forward and swayed a little, but he still managed to stand firm. At this moment, there was nothing under his feet to support him, and he looked like he was standing in the air. Sun Huaying said lightly, "The founding master once used his mana here. Only those with a strong heart and perseverance would be able to solidify the qi under their feet. Those who walk on it, if their determination wavers, the qi will disperse, and they will fall into the abyss." Zhang Yan looked at it. If one wanted to reach the opposite cliff, they would have to walk about 10,000 steps. If one of them stepped on empty air, in other words, if there was even the slightest bit of doubt and confusion, they would immediately be doomed. It must be known that even if these people practiced breathing techniques, they were only mortals. The cold air and strong winds of the mountain could affect them. Those who could pass this test must be rare and persevering warriors. Just as he looked, the teenager who took a step forward just now was suddenly sweating profusely. He stood there motionless, and then his body started to shake violently. Sun Huaying said indifferently, "He lost." Just as she finished speaking, the teenager stepped on empty air. His mouth was wide open, and his arms and legs were shaking wildly, as if he was trying to grab something. His expression was one of confusion and fear. His body fell, and in the blink of an eye, he disappeared into the endless clouds. Zhang Yan asked, "Is there anyone down there to save him?" Sun Huaying shook her head and said, "If the person who fell was saved, he would definitely think that he was lucky. Then, setting up this heart-refining chain would be useless." Zhang Yan sighed softly. It was not easy for mortals to seek Tao. Shaoqing was a first-rate Xianmen sect, and it specialized in the sword path. It was especially demanding on one's temperament. If his previous self had not gone to Qinsong, but to Shaoqing, he would probably have died here. Sun Huaying said lightly, "If you pass this test, you can go to the opposite cliff to search for opportunities. We have buried 10 sword pellets in the mountain. As long as you can find them within 30 days, you can enter the mountain and join our sect." 30 days? Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. This mountain was so vast that it stretched for 10,000 miles. With a mortal's body and 2 legs, how far could they walk in 30 days? If they wanted to find 10 sword pellets, it would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. Sun Huaying said, "At most 30 days. The opposite cliff will have no clothes and no food. Every month, there will definitely be a cold wave. If you're still inside, you'll definitely die. If you haven't found the sword pellets by then, there's only one way to save yourself. He paused and said in a deep voice, "Go back the way you came from on the heart-refining chain. After the cold wind passes, you can go to the opposite cliff to search for opportunities." Chapter 786. Zhang Yan waited for a while and saw another person walking up the heart-refining chain. However, after this person walked 100 steps away, he stopped moving and retreated step by step. When he reached the edge of the cliff, he didn't show any signs of disappointment or unwillingness. Instead, there was excitement in his expression. Sun Huaying said, 3 years ago, I came here with a few of my fellow disciples to take a look. At that time, I also saw this person. At that time, he only took 10 steps. Who would have thought that he would be able to travel more than 300 steps? At most, in another 10 years, he will reach the opposite cliff. Zhang Yan was shocked, but I see that this person is already over 20 years old. After he passes this place in the future, I'm afraid he's already past the age of proper cultivation. Cultivation was limited by age too. Other than those special cases, it was best to enter Tao when one was over 10 years old. If it was too late, the body would have grown and the bones would have been fixed, and it would be difficult for one to achieve much. With this person's age, even if he entered Shaoqing, he might not be able to open his meridians. Sun Huang explained, those who can pass the dragon fins back can be counted as a lower sect disciple of Shaoqing. And for people like him who are determined and willing to improve, although he can't enter Upper Peak to cultivate, he can enter our sect as a steward and take care of the sect's affairs. If he's unwilling, he can also stay at the foot of Big Peak, and he will not have to worry about anything for the rest of his life. Although these people who were too old could no longer practice the superior Dharma access, they could live and reproduce in a place like the sun-piercing Great Mountain Peak where spiritual vigor gathered. Even if they failed, their descendants could bathe in spiritual qi for a long time. After dozens of generations, it was not impossible for them to produce a talent. Moreover, because they grew up under the Shaoqing mountain, they were influenced by the rumors of sword immortals who could fly in the sky, burrow into the ground, and live freely for a long time. Therefore, all of them felt proud to enter the Shaoqing mountain. And those who could walk a few steps on the heart-refining chain would be regarded as heroes and be respected. Even when women chose husbands, they would choose them first. As the two of them were looking, a spiritual light flew over. Sun Huaying took it and looked at it. She was surprised and said, "Marshal Uncleing wants to see you now. It's rare for me to be free. I can't talk to you for long." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There will be a chance." The two of them immediately set off. The Shaoqing sect was mostly made up of sword cultivators, and they were particular about being unrestrained and unrestrained. Therefore, there weren't many rules in the sect. Sun Huaying led Zhang Yan directly to the front of Clear Swan Palace. The disciple on duty only asked casually before letting him walk in. This was where the Shaoqing spiritual eye was located. Zhang Yan stepped into the back of the hall. He secretly compared and realized that this place was indeed formed from the spiritual energy of a continent. The abundance of spiritual opportunity was not inferior to the floating heavenly palace. After walking for a short while, they arrived at the hall and saw an amiable old Taoist in his 40s sitting in the middle of the hall. His expression was kind, and there were rays of dazzling light circulating above his head, illuminating the entire hall and making it so that even the slightest detail could be seen. Zhang Yan stopped and bowed. "Zhang Yan greets Ing Zhenren." Ing Chuanxiu stood up slowly and returned the greeting. He said slowly, "Envoy of Qinsong, you don't have to be so polite." He paused and said, "May I know if your sect master has brought a letter?" Zhang Yan took out the letter from his sleeve and said, "My sect master has said that I need to ask your sect master to read it personally." Ing Chuanxiu nodded and said, "Please wait for a moment, Envoy of Qinsong." He waved his hand and took the letter, then turned and went to the back of the hall. After a while, he came out and said, "Sect master invites Envoy to the back of the hall to meet him." Zhang Yan tidied his robe and walked into the hall. After a while, he arrived at the inner room and looked up. He saw a Taoist standing in the hall with his hands behind his back. The Taoist seemed to be in his 30s. He had a straight nose and a square mouth. His eyes were filled with divine light, and he had a clear aura between his brows. Countless silver rays were flying around his body like thousands of swords clashing, and like a spring falling into a deep stream. Strange sounds were heard, and it was the sect master of Shaoqing sect, Yu Xianxiao. Zhang Yan took a step forward and bowed. He said loudly, "Envoy of Qinsong, Zhang Yan, greets sect master Yu." Yu Xianxiao waved his hand casually and pointed at a praying mat nearby. He said, "You don't have to be so polite here. Sit down and talk." Zhang Yan thanked him and sat down. Yu Xianxiao also sat down on the praying mat opposite him. He said with a smile, "I owed Brother Qin a favor back then, and I thought he had already forgotten about it. I didn't want it to fall on you." He looked at Zhang Yan a few more times before saying, "Take out your sword sphere and let me take a look." Zhang Yan's aura sank, and with a thought, a sword cry was heard. A dazzling light flew out and hovered half a foot above the praying mat. Yu Xianxiao glanced at it and said, "Looking at your sword sphere, I can see that you've refined it with our Shaoqing sect's technique. This technique is used by low-level disciples to enter the sect, and it's not a profound technique. Moreover, the sword sphere has flaws. Although the cultivation of the person who refined the sword is high enough, his cultivation is too shallow, and his technique is also inferior, causing it to not be pure enough. This kind of sword sphere is only at the bottom in our sect, and it's impossible to use it to comprehend the superior sword Dao." There was no belittling or praising in his words, and he only spoke calmly. Zhang Yan humbly asked for guidance. "Then, what should I do if I want to comprehend the superior sword Dao?" Yu Xianxiao looked at him and said, "I only have one question for you. Do you really want to learn the true technique of our sect?" Zhang Yan said solemnly, "I will naturally seek the true technique." Yu Xianxiao said, "All right." After he finished speaking, he flipped his palm and actually caught Zhang Yan's sword sphere in his hand. After that, he lightly grasped it, and a crisp sound rang out. The sword sphere was actually crushed into pieces, and it turned into specks of spiritual dust that scattered down. Zhang Yan's sword sphere was originally connected to his mind. If it was injured, it would definitely be his mind. However, even though it was clearly destroyed, he faintly felt that it was still there. This feeling was extremely mysterious and indescribable. When Yu Xianxiao saw that Su Kei's expression was calm and didn't show any signs of panic or shock, a trace of admiration appeared in his eyes, and he said, "I will first bestow upon you a sword refinement technique. Take it and practice it. After that, you can refine a sword sphere on your own. If you need anything, you can ask Huaying for it. If you can't do it, then there's no need for you to come to me." Zhang Yan suddenly felt that there was something in his hand, but he didn't look at it. He immediately put it into his sleeve and stood up to take his leave. After Su Kei left, Ying Chuanqiu came in and asked, "Master, why did you bestow upon him the sword refinement technique?" Yu Xianxiao smiled and said, "What? Are you afraid that this technique will be leaked out?" Ying Chuanqiu shook his head and said, "Why would I be afraid of that? My Shaoqing sect's technique places great importance on one's disposition and aptitude. Even if the sword refinement technique was passed down to the world, how many people would be able to successfully practice it? However, there's no turning back once we take the step. This person's identity is different. If anything goes wrong, I'm afraid that sect Master Qin won't be able to explain it." This step was extremely dangerous. If he couldn't take it, it would be equivalent to his sword refinement technique being crippled. After all, Zhang Yan was the first seat of the 10 great disciples of the Qinsong. It was very likely that he would enter the Truth Purification Palace in the future. If he lost a technique because of this, even if the Qinsong didn't say anything on the surface, there would definitely be discord between the two sects in the future. However, Yu Xianxiao didn't care. He said, "He wants me to practice the Shaoqing true inheritance. That's why. Since Qin Mabai sent him to look for me, then he should have thought it through." Ying Chuanqiu sighed inwardly. The Shaoqing disciples practiced the sword. Most of them obtained a sword pellet when they were young and used the profound technique of the sect to refine it for hundreds of years to remove the traces left behind by the original person who refined the sword. Only then could they achieve twice the result with half the effort. However, Zhang Yan didn't specialize in the sword Dao. In his opinion, he only needed to teach him some techniques from the side branches. That way, it would be acceptable for both sides. However, his master insisted on teaching him as a Shaoqing true disciple, which made him feel slightly helpless. After Zhang Yan returned, Sun Huaying was still in the pavilion making arrangements. She didn't expect him to return so quickly, so she casually asked him a few questions. Because he still needed this person's help in refining the sword, Zhang Yan didn't hide anything and told him everything that had happened. After listening to him, Sun Huaying frowned and said, "Fellow Taoist, do you know that if you can't pass this stage, you won't be able to use the sword anymore?" Zhang Yan smiled. He already knew the consequences from sect Master Yu's words. He used the sword pellet for over 200 years. Just the sword escape technique alone was enough to give him an advantage among his peers. If he failed and lost this technique, his strength would definitely drop. It would be a lie to say that it wasn't a pity. However, divine abilities and Taoist techniques weren't easily taught. If he wanted to learn the true inheritance, he would definitely have to take some risks. If he only obtained the superficial knowledge, he might as well not learn it. Taking a step back even if he failed, so what? In the past, old ancestor Tai Han broke his tail to seek the Tao. He gave up his demonic cultivation technique and cultivated the Shenmen cultivation technique again. In the end, he ascended to the higher realms. He didn't know how to use the flying sword. Perfected Shin Chong of the Guangyuan sect dominated the world. Even the Nether Springs sect couldn't compete with him. He also didn't know how to use the flying sword. Patriarch Dami of the Dongsheng continent destroyed the spirit-returning sect alone. He also didn't know how to use the flying sword. All these people didn't know how to use the sword. However, all of them ascended to the higher realms. To put it bluntly, the art of flying sword was just one of the methods to protect himself. It wasn't his own Tao. With his current position in the Qinsong sect, it would be best if he had it. If he didn't, he could find another method. There was no need for him to be too stubborn. Sun Huaying looked at his carefree manner and could not help but admire him. He said in a serious tone, "There are many external medicines used to cultivate the sword. Since the sect master has taken care of me, if you need anything I, Sun, will definitely do my best to help." Zhang Yan thanked him and smiled. "When the time comes, I'll have to trouble you, Taoist Sun." After bidding farewell to Sun Huaying, he returned to the pavilion and sat down. He took out the item from his sleeve. It was a jade scroll. He probed it with his spiritual opportunity. In an instant, a spell appeared in his consciousness. To be precise, there were two spells here. One was to nurture the sword, and the other was to cultivate the sword. Shaoqing disciples could obtain a sword pellet after joining the sect. This sword pellet was very ordinary in the beginning, but with this sword nurturing technique, it would be nurtured and refined day and night. As the disciples' cultivation improved, it would gradually be refined and purified. In the future, if it became a grotto heaven, there was a high chance that it could be nurtured and refined into a true weapon. As for the sword refining technique, because the disciples' cultivation was not good when he joined the sect, he would usually let his master refine it for him before bestowing it to the disciple. However, this method was despised by the Shaoqing disciples. Some disciples even rejected the sword bestowed upon them by their masters. Hence, unless the sword pellet was damaged during a battle, they would only use this method to refine it. To Zhang Yan, the sword nurturing technique obviously couldn't be used anymore. Hence, he could only choose the second method. After looking closely, he realized that the sword pellet was also divided into 36 grades in the Shaoqing sect. The higher the grade, the more extraordinary the external medicine required. His gaze swept past the rest and went straight to the highest grade. Since the Shaoqing sect master allowed him to use the sect's items to refine the sword, he didn't mind taking advantage of it. The first grade sword pellet was called the Clear Great Mysterious Sword. It was the sword pellet refinement technique passed down by the Shaoqing sect's founder, Ancestor Hong Yun. It required over 30,000 kinds of rare external medicine to refine. The spells attached to it were not ordinary words, but were all written with erosion runes. He looked through the required external medicine one by one. When he reached the last medicine, his gaze couldn't help but stop. The words, Jun Yang Essence Qi, were written on it. The note even purposely pointed out that this qi should be harvested from star stones. If it was contaminated with impurities, it would inevitably be inferior. Zhang Yan looked down and smiled. He thought to himself, this is the sword. Chapter 787. He wants to blood bond with the first-grade clear Great Mystery Sword? Ying Chuanxiu was surprised at first, then he frowned and said, the envoy of the Qinsong is being too arrogant. Ran Xiushu, on the other hand, had a relaxed expression on her face as she said, Master, this Zhenren Zhang is the first seat of the 10 great disciples of Qinsong, so it's reasonable for him to want to refine the clear swan sword pellet. Back then, when Elder Zhua and Elder Zhua fought with the Netherworld Spring Sect's devil cultivators, their sword pellets were tainted, but didn't they refine 2 more clear swan mysterious swords? It's just that they don't have the energy essence of Jun Yang extracted from the star stone, so their quality is slightly inferior. If I were to refine it now, I wouldn't necessarily lose to them. Qinghong magic swords sounded very famous, but in the Shaoqing sect, all the Yuanying disciples knew how to sacrificial refine it. In his opinion, it was just using more external medicine. Even if it could be refined, it was not much better than the sword pill that the true disciples had spent hundreds of years to sacrificial refine. In the future, it still needed to be nourished by the sword nurturing method. Ying Chuanxiu shook his head and said, You're wrong. The 2 elders were able to succeed because they had been nurturing their swords for hundreds of years. They were already familiar with the technique and understood the key points in operating it. It looks like they're trying it out for the first time, but it's actually something that they've been doing for a long time. When the conditions are right, success will naturally follow. However, the Qinsong envoys aren't Shaoqing disciples, so how can they be confused? Sword nurturing and sword refining each had their own merits, and it was hard to say which was better. However, the former required hundreds of thousands of years of slowly tempering and nurturing, tempering, and improving the quality of the sword according to the realm of cultivation. In this way, the ship would rise with the tide, and the man and the sword would complement each other, making it the most solid and stable. The latter, on the other hand, was tempered by external medicine and first upgraded the sword's grade. After that, he would have to use a superior technique to refine it, but it would be the method of subduing the sword. The sword was like a fierce horse. After it was refined, he would still need to use a superior technique to subdue it patiently. Only then could he control it as he wished. However, this was a great test of the caster's abilities. It was equivalent to walking a path that others had walked for hundreds or thousands of years in a short period of time. Among them, the highest grade clear swan mysterious sword was the hardest to refine, especially for those who didn't major in the sword Dao. Its complexity and difficulty were unimaginable. It was not something that could be passed just by relying on one's comprehension and innate talent. Ran Xiushu thought for a while and remained optimistic. She said, I'm afraid Master is worrying too much. Zhenren Zhang's Dan has reached the first rank. I don't think he's going to shoot for no reason. Anyone who could refine a first-grade pill. Fortuitous encounters, secret techniques, means, and temperament were indispensable. He thought about it and felt that since Zhang Yan said that he wanted to blood bond with the clear swan sword, he should be able to do so. He should be confident, otherwise, wouldn't he be making a fool out of himself? Ying Chuanxiu remained silent. The disciples of the minor clear lineage focused on cultivation and rarely cared about external affairs. In the entire sect, he was the only one who worried about maintaining the sect's affairs. However, the more things he considered, the more concerns he had in his heart. Especially when it came to Qinsong School, one of the 3 great mysterious sects, he had to be even more cautious. He naturally hoped that Zhang Yan could succeed in one fell swoop to prevent any future troubles. However, he had to think about some things first, especially if it did not work out. As for the 30,000 types of external medicine needed to refine the sword, it was not a big deal. There were very few people in the sect who refined swords. External items would be delivered from the central pillar state every 3 years. The storage was already piled up like a mountain. After pondering for a while, he made a decision. He said, "Go back and tell Huaying to let the Qinsong envoy refine the sword using the other Tiantai sword furnace. He can take any of the external medicine in the storage. Also, bring the 3 volumes of Hongweng's Taoist supplement and let him take a look." These 3 scrolls of Taoist books were the essentials of sword forging recorded by the predecessors of the Shaoqing dynasty. He thought that he had done his best by doing so. If it still failed, then the Yuzong sect had nothing to say. Ran Xiushu stood up and cupped his hands. "I will do it now." He left the temple and sent the 3 volumes of Taoist books to Sun Huai. He then went to the storage and passed on Ying Chuanxiu's message. Feeling that the matter was settled, he immediately felt relaxed. He flew into the sky and excitedly went to find someone to spar with. On the second day, Sun Huaying rushed to the funeral hall and told Zhang Yan about Ying Chuanxiu's reply. The two of them discussed for a while and flew to the other Tiantai sword furnace. This sword furnace was located on the demon-subduing peak of the Great Mountain. The fire vent on the mountain peak spewed out fiery spiritual qi and rumbled. It was directly opposite the mouth of the sword furnace. From afar, thick smoke mixed with black and red flames could be seen rolling in all directions. The scorching heat suffused the sky. Sun Huaying called out from the outside. The managing disciple in the other Tiantai immediately removed the outer barrier and welcomed the two of them in. Although the outside was covered in smoke, the inside was beautiful with mountains and clear waters. The scenery was so beautiful that it could make one forget about their worries. The sword furnace was not placed in the open but was hidden deep inside the mountain. Zhang Yan followed the Taoist in and entered a cave. After about 15 minutes, they arrived at the boundary. He looked over and saw that the sword furnace was shaped like a gourd. It was divided into 2 potholes, one big and one small. It was filled with spiritual liquid and there were 2 tender green leaves floating in the pool. The fragrance of the leaves was refreshing. The Taoist in charge said, "To Zenrens, the fire vent outside is above the Jiutian realm. It's inevitable that there will be heroes who accidentally enter. As time goes by, the qi of vigor will become fierce and will inevitably contain yang poison. Although this fire can be used to refine swords, the smoke will pollute spiritual vigor. Thus, when refining swords, we need these 2 snow-fragrant leaves to dispel the fire poison." Sun Huaying asked, "Is the spiritual medicine complete?" The Taoist in charge said respectfully, "Last night, the servants at the treasury had already sent the spiritual medicine over. I ordered people to spend the whole night organizing it. Do you need the Qinsong envoy to inspect it first? If there's anything missing, I'll go and ask for it." Before this, no matter if it was the treasury or the sword furnace, they were all taken care of by the sect. There couldn't be any mistakes in the spiritual medicine that was sent over. If not, they would be punished for negligence. Although Shaoqing sect didn't pay much attention to rules, that was only for direct disciples. For people like the Taoist in charge, they couldn't make any mistakes. If not, they would be punished heavily. Even their relatives and friends at the foot of the mountain would be chased out of Diyu Mountain. Thus, all of them did their best and didn't dare to make any mistakes. Zhang Yan took a look and saw that the spiritual medicine was stored in bamboo-like jade tubes. From the top to the bottom, there was a thin chain hanging down. There were also small notes on it. It could be said that it was easy to understand. He smiled and said, "There's no need for that. It's just that I still have something to ask Taoist later." The Taoist deacon felt slightly flattered and hurriedly said, I don't dare. Sun Huaying said, "Taoist brother, I'll wait outside the sword furnace. If you need my help, just let me know." When the disciples of Shaoqing sect were forging and sacrificing their swords, it was a taboo to have others around. Zhang Yan wasn't a disciple of Shaoqing sect, but he didn't want to break this rule. After he finished speaking, he bowed and walked outside. After he left, Zhang Yan called the Taoist deacon over and asked about the details of this sword furnace. Then he walked around the mouth of the furnace and flipped through the spiritual medicine. Because there were more than 30,000 types, he didn't search them one by one. He only picked a few important spiritual materials to examine. At this time, his footsteps stopped, and his gaze focused on a jade tube. With a wave of his hand, he took it over. He sensed it and found that there were several threads of Junyang essence inside. However, when he examined it carefully, he realized that the qi wasn't pure. It was even more impure than the essence that Guiyuan Jun absorbed with the primordial pearl. It wasn't that Shaoqing sect didn't want to take it out. Although the people of the Grotto Heaven could go above the 9 heavens to collect Junyang essence, it would only be the purest after it was refined by the celestial star stone. The portion that was obtained from the sword battle had already been given out. Zhang Yan smiled. This was what he expected. Fortunately, he still had a lot of Junyang essence after he forged his Dharmakaya, so he could use it this time. He waved at the Taoist deacon and said, "Taoist, please leave first." The Taoist deacon felt as though he was pardoned. He bowed and retreated. Zhang Yan sat on the cattail hassock in front of the furnace. He wasn't in a hurry to start the sacrificial refining, but he focused on regulating his qi dynamic. After 2 hours, he activated his mana to ignite the fire in the furnace. Then, he activated the spiritual opportunity and opened the furnace to forge the sword. There were 2 steps to forging the sword. First, he needed to forge a sword embryo with the 30,000 plus external herbs. Then, he would use the mental cultivation method passed down by the Shaoqing sect master to nurture it. The first step didn't require a profound technique. As long as the cultivator had a rough understanding of how to forge the weapon and control the fire well, he would be qualified. Therefore, it wasn't difficult for Zhang Yan. After the fire in the furnace was lit, he followed the technique recorded on the jade scroll and started the sacrificial refining step by step. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. He felt that the temperature in the cauldron was ready. With a shout, he withdrew his mana. With a rumbling sound, the spiritual liquid in the cauldron boiled and emitted a dense mist. Within the mist, 7 spiritual lights could be faintly seen flashing. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and dispersed the smoke. He looked down and saw 7 balls of pure elixirs that seemed like qi yet not qi, like essence yet not essence. They were emitting a faint light. Among them, there was one that was bright and dazzling. It was obvious that it had gathered spiritual opportunity and stood out from the rest. Previously, he had thought that if he refined the sword embryo with so many spiritual herbs, there might be more than 1 elixir. However, he didn't expect to refine 7 elixirs in this furnace. He pondered for a while and took the purest elixir into his avatar. Then, he took out 3 elixirs that looked acceptable and kept them separately. He planned to give them to Shaoqing as a gift in return after he came out of seclusion. Although the sword embryo was formed, he didn't have the true mental cultivation method to refine it. It was far from a success. If it was taken by someone who didn't know the technique, it would only be wasted. The next step was the most crucial step. Whether it succeeded or not depended on this. If he made a mistake, all his previous efforts would go to waste. His expression turned solemn. He took out the 3 Taoist books that Ying Chuanxiu gave him and slowly opened them, reading them attentively. He only put down the book after reading for 10 days. He closed his eyes and didn't move, as if he was thinking about the profoundness in it. After a while, he slowly opened his eyes and praised in his heart, "The book left behind by the predecessors is indeed extraordinary. After reading this book, I can indeed avoid many detours. However, this is still not enough for me. I need to use other methods." He was not a Shaoqing disciple and had never come into contact with the method of refining and nurturing swords. Even if he had the 3 Taoist books as a reference, he would only gain some insights. It was probably impossible for him to reach the top in a single step. Fortunately, he had the remnant of the jade. He could practice it repeatedly until he was familiar with the technique. It would not be too late to refine it after that. He flicked his finger, and several spiritual lights flew out. He first set up a restriction around him. Then he sat up straight and held the remnant of the jade in his hand. His mind sank into it, and he started deducing attentively. Chapter 788. However, since there are 2 chapters, there will definitely be 2 chapters. Those who can't wait can read it tomorrow. Happy May 1st. Within the sword furnace, 20 years passed in the blink of an eye as Zhang Yan sat there. Over 80 days in the remnant jade was only a day in the outside world. After 20 years, it was as if he had immersed himself in this path for over 1,600 years. Under his repeated deductions, he'd already thoroughly understood the crux of refining the sword embryo, and he'd already memorized every single step by heart. Yuanian cultivators had a lifespan of 1,000 years, but in terms of the time he spent on this technique, he had already far surpassed those Shaoqing disciples of the same generation. If there were no accidents, he was almost certain to refine the clear swan mysterious sword this time. After he withdrew his consciousness from the remnant jade, he checked the restrictions around him. Seeing that there were no abnormalities, and that there were no signs of people from Shaoqing coming here, he did not delay any longer and decided to officially start refining the sword sphere. With a push in his heart, the sword embryo flew out and hovered in front of his nose. His gaze shifted slightly, and with a turn of his mind, he channeled his magic power and spiritual opportunity into it. Then he started refining at a moderate pace. In a flash, another 10 years passed. Within the sword furnace, Zhang Yan's sword sacrifice had already reached the most crucial step. His body was solemn and his eyes flickered. He looked at the shining sword sphere in front of him, and struck dozens of seals on it according to the refinement technique. The sword sphere trembled slightly, and with a few clanging sounds, it spun rapidly. The place where it was seemed to have become the eye of a whirlpool, and the surrounding spiritual energy kept pouring in. In the end, the ball of sword light suddenly stopped moving. Then, a forceful struggle came, as if it wanted to break free and fly away. Zhang Yan smiled. He first used his magic power to stabilize it, and only after it was tamed and no longer moved did he let it go. The sword sphere had been forcefully suppressed for several days. Now that the restraints were gone, it instantly let out a joyful cry. In that instant, a whistling sound came from within the sword furnace. All the spiritual energy seemed to be sucked in at the same time. Then, there was a sword hum that resounded through the heavens. A clear qi easily pierced through the restrictions and rushed into the clouds. Within the clear swan palace, Ying Chuanxiu put down the scroll in his hand. He looked out of the palace. The Qinsong envoys have been in the sword furnace for 30 years? Although Ran Xiushu was sitting by the table, he was already drowsy. He did not want to take care of these mundane affairs. However, as the eldest disciple of Ying Chuanxiu, he had to come here every day to listen to instructions. At this moment, when he heard his master's question, he forced himself to answer. The elders in the sect need at least 10 years to make the sword pill. Zhenren Zhang is not a member of our sect, so I'm afraid it will take even longer. I think it will take at least 67 years, and even 100 years wouldn't be strange. Ying Chuanxiu nodded. There was some basis to this deduction. Zhang Yan was not a sword cultivator. No matter how talented he was bound to make a few mistakes when it was his first time practicing the sword. 30 years would only be enough for him to sort out his thoughts. He said in a deep voice, it would be best if he could succeed. In recent years, the demonic cultivators have become restless. If he still can't refine the sword pill in the next few decades, I'm afraid he won't have a chance. Ran Xiushu's heart moved when he heard this. He asked in a low voice, Master, is the devil's cave about to appear? Ying Chuanxiu glanced at him and did not hide it. He said, Sect leader has been observing and sensing recently. He can determine that the first devil's cave will appear in at most 30 to 40 years. Ran Xiushu's face suddenly lit up. Once the devil's cave appeared, needless to say, the 6 major demonic sects would definitely send people to protect it. They would not be as elusive as before. It was a good time to kill them. After a while of excitement, he calmed down. He thought for a while and said, in this case, Zhenren Zhang does not have much time left. As the head of the top 10 disciples, Zhang Yan could not stay in the Shaoqing sect for a long time. Once the Devil's Cave appeared, he would definitely be summoned back to the Qinsong sect. If he failed to refine the sword at that time, it would be a wasted trip. Not only that, he would not be able to use the flying sword from then on. It was definitely not good news for the upcoming battle in the Xianmen sect. At first, Ran Xiushu had some confidence in Zhang Yan, but at this moment, he was a little doubtful. Ying Chuanxiu was about to speak when he suddenly sensed something. He stood up and looked in one direction. That was where the Bi Tiantai was located. After looking for a while, he suddenly heard a sword cry in the sky. With a swoosh, a rainbow-like sword, light sword like a star hanging high in the sky, emitting a clear brilliance that illuminated the void. Ran Xiushu looked at this scene and was shocked. She said, "This? Could it be that Zhenren Zhang has already refined the sword pill?" Ying Chuanxiu looked at the sword light that filled the sky. It was clear, and there was no doubt that it was the Qing Hong mysterious sword. He was also shocked and couldn't help but sigh with pity. He said, "There's actually such a talent in the Qinsong school. Why isn't he a Shaoqing disciple with such talent in the sword Dao?" When the sword pill flew out, it caused a commotion. Not only them, but many Shaoqing disciples were also alarmed. As not many people knew that Zhang Yan came to the sect to ask for a sword, they thought that an elder in the sect had refined a superior sword pill. Ying Chuanxiu seemed to have thought of something at this moment. He suddenly frowned and said, "Xiushu, quickly pass on my order. If anyone asks about what happened tonight, say that Elder Shui was refining the sword pill. Don't say that he's a Qinsong messenger." Ran Xiushu thought about it and guessed the reason behind it. She stood up and cupped her hands. "I'll pass on the order right now." On the demon-subduing peak, Zhang Yan waved his hand at the sky. The sword pill immediately retracted its spiritual light and turned into a clear rainbow that fell down. It landed on his palm in an instant, and a strange feeling surged into his heart. It was as if the sword pill was connected to his mind and flesh. Although the sword pill in his hand had such a feeling in the past, it was not as strong as it was now. When he sensed it carefully, he felt that it seemed to be breathing slowly as if it was alive. He instantly knew that the sword pill had been reborn at this moment. After a while, a restlessness came from within, as if it was urging him to circulate his sword immediately. He was about to do as it wished, but when he was about to circulate his mana, he raised his eyebrows. He suddenly felt that something seemed to be missing and was not complete yet. It might be inappropriate to circulate it in a hurry, so he stopped. After thinking about it, he kept the sword pill back into his body. He waved his sleeves, removed the surrounding restrictions, and walked out of the sword furnace. The Taoist steward was guarding the door. After 30 years, his temples were slightly white, and his face had aged a lot. On the other hand, Zhang Yan's appearance had not changed at all. He looked at him enviously and came up to greet him. "Honorable guest, you've come out of seclusion?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I've already forged the profound sword. That day, I produced 7 sword embryos in 1 cauldron, and now there are 3 left in the sword pool. Those are gifts for your esteemed sect to thank for your help this time." To refine a sword, one had to use their mental cultivation method to connect their minds. However, there was no need to do so for a sword embryo. If it wasn't for the fact that Shaoqing sect didn't have a Qinghong mysterious sword embryo, he would have taken it and used it directly. At this moment, he left 3 behind as repayment for the medicine. The Taoist steward hurriedly said, "I'll definitely tell the sect the truth. I don't dare to take it rashly." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and rode the strong wind out of demon-subduing peak. As soon as he arrived outside, he looked up and saw a Taoist in green standing in the clouds. He bowed and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist Sun. Ever since Zhang Yan refined the sword, Sun Huaying would take some time to come here every day. Just now, when he saw the sword light flying up, how could he not know that Zhang Yan had refined the sword pill? Therefore, he immediately rushed over on the conveyance light. He also bowed and said, 'Fellow Taoist has refined the sword for 30 years and finally succeeded. Congratulations. Zhang Yan said with a smile. If it wasn't for your help, it wouldn't be so smooth. After the two of them talked for a while, Zhang Yan was about to return to the pavilion, but Sun Huaying stopped him and said, "Wait, why don't you stay in my cave house for a few days first?" Zhang Yan knew that there had to be a reason for this. He thought for a while and cupped his hands, saying, "Then I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist." Sun Huaying's cave house wasn't far from the sword furnace. The two of them only traveled for a short while before they arrived. Zhang Yan looked over and saw that the mountain walls of this sword platform were steep as if they had been chiseled by knives and swords. A waterfall with extraordinary aura poured down, so the waterfall was extremely wide. From afar, it looked like a curtain of beads. At the top, there was a stone altar that was about 50 to 60 feet in size. It was shaped like a funnel, and below it was a hanging ladder that hung diagonally down. It looked like a flying kite. The altar was shrouded in a thin mist, and on the cold cliffs and peaks, the snow was like jade. Below it, however, was lush with plants, rocks, and ancient vines, thriving. A sword light flashed in the middle of the platform, and a youth with handsome features flew out on conveyance light. He came before the two of them and bowed to Sun Huaying. "Teacher." Sun Huaying nodded and said to Zhang Yan, "This is my disciple, Fong Cod." She then said to the disciple, "This is spiritual master Zhang of Qinsong School, my good friend. You should call him Uncle Master." The disciple hurriedly bowed and said, "Greetings, Uncle Master Zhang." Sun Huaying waved her hand and ordered the disciple to leave. She brought Zhang Yan to the sword platform and sat down in the cave house. She said, "Half a month ago, there was a letter saying that Yu Xiao sent an envoy to the sect. I heard that the envoy this time is Zhou Huang, and he will arrive by tomorrow at the latest." Zhang Yan's gaze flashed, and he understood. No wonder Shaoqing had made such arrangements. Zhou Qingyun had been killed by him in the sword competition assembly. Not to mention the Zhou clan's private conflict with him, just on the surface, they didn't seem to be on good terms. Shaoqing was afraid that something would happen if the two of them stayed in the funeral hall. He smiled and said, "I wonder where my senior apprentice brother Miao and the other elders are now." Sun Huaying said in a low voice, "Senior apprentice brother Ran has already made arrangements. He won't meet with Yu Xiao's disciples." He then said seriously, "Fellow Taoist has refined the sword for 30 years. I think you urgently need to build your qi and condense your dharmakaya. You can cultivate here without worry. I won't disturb you." After he finished speaking, he stood up and bowed before walking out of the door. Zhang Yan smiled and stood up to send him off. What he had achieved was the Yuanjin Dharmakaya. Yin and Yang were in harmony, and the inside and outside were one. The sharp qi on the outside was hard to wear down. Even if he walked on this extreme heaven, he wouldn't suffer any losses. However, there was no need to say this out loud. After he returned to the couch and sat down, he fell into deep thought. He was thinking about the purpose of Yu Xiao's envoy this time. After a few thoughts, he already had some guesses in his heart. However, this wasn't a big deal after all. The most important thing now was to learn the true inheritance of the sword technique as soon as possible. Fortunately, before the Devil's Cave appeared, he would have one more trick up his sleeve. Therefore, he quickly put this matter aside and sat down cross-legged, breathing and expelling. Very quickly, the night passed. He came out of the cave house in high spirits. After greeting Sun Huaying, he rode the strong wind and headed to Qinghong Palace. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.